Okay, I'm going to say hello to anyone watching the replay. Shout out to you. Appreciate you.
But not hello to anyone watching live. We don't.
Leave all your thoughts below. Okay, now to the people live. Hey, what's up? Oh, I see him. I don't know if it's live on the tubes yet, but I see comments.
Hello.
Good evening. Sup? Wait. I hope y'all are ready for some strong opinions.
For some squeeing, maybe even.
Maybe some chaotic banter.
Stop trying to make squee happen.
Squeak is a thing. It's already happened.
Yeah.
So many familiar faces, names. Oh, from Manila. Hello.
Hi.
Oh my God. I can't wait to watch it tomorrow on Hulu. Everyone should be watching Abbott Elementary. It's so good. It is so. Hi, everyone. We're here to talk about. Every time I say it, I'm like, is this a real word?
Oh my God.
SQUEECORE?
Factor cap.
Oh, yes.
Ah.
We love a good family discussion. Yeah. Do we know what's happening?
I was going to say, like, to start out with, like, is this podcast successful in terms of if you determine if something is successful based on did it do what it set out to do? Did it accomplish what it set out to do? And if it ostensibly set out to define SQUEECORE, then by that metric, it failed utterly because it did not define SQUEECORE.
And
Yes,
multiple people here have consumed it multiple times. Well, it does, but then it doesn't. It has like 5 parts to the definition.
Oh my
But
gosh.
those parts also contradict each other. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
The trailer was
Hello.
The trailer was
iconic.
This, like, I've never heard it before.
This
I
is
think
just one Discord that uses
like,
it.
there's like a few people that are trying to make it a thing. Is
Yeah.
really, yeah.
Oh,
You're trying to make fetch happen.
Yeah, it's such a. Someone texted me and they're like, "Oh, the new Twitter discourse." And I'm like, "Oh God, what is it?" And they're like, "SQUEECORE," and I'm like, "I don't even what." No idea. Thank you. So yeah, so the podcast. I don't know if I have it linked here, but I don't know. It's called Right Good.
I mean,
Yeah.
if you just search like your podcast provider for SQUEECORE, it'll be like the
it's
first
called
Yeah.
A Guide to SQUEECORE, and it's like, what is it? A little bit over an hour.
With a
Speed it
1-minute intro song.
And the in-between music is also
So
quite long.
long.
Well, yeah.
That's
new-
just bad production quality.
Yeah.
As a YouTuber, I don't agree.
I mean, it is really
Okay, also, before we fully pile on, I do want to mention I did a little bit of research on the reach of this podcast. And
Ooh.
it's hard to figure out exact numbers, but based on the available data, I think that this is reaching like 2,000-ish people.
Okay.
And then they have 139 patrons. So I do want to also just say, like, I feel like we may be punching down slightly, but it's so rage-inducing. I'm okay with that. But I do want to just acknowledge that, like, I don't think that this is
will
like
have a similar reach.
Well, but
Yeah.
I would also just like to jump off that point. One of the points made by the host of the podcast is that she's upset that no one talked about an article that she wrote, and I think we're doing her the courtesy of talking about what
that
she
is
had
true.
to say.
Good
To
point.
engage with her argument. Well,
That.
because it was a guy and a gal.
Mhm.
I think I don't know what their pronouns are, but 2 people. So we're
Okay.
going to engage with their
So- Danny
their
thinks we did a
argument.
good job of defining the term.
Good.
And
you
it
define it
does
in the
sound
chat?
like NFT. Yes, if you've listened or if you've read any of the discourse on SQUEECORE, what do you think it is? And also, can go around, can you give me a brief summary of what you think SQUEECORE is from what you've consumed? Because to me, it's a term that they say
It's a
applies
vibe.
to everything, yet applies to very little in the science fiction fantasy realm of publishing, is what I've gotten.
What I know about it is that they purposely chose this term to be like making fun of something that they think is prevalent. Like it's meant to have a negative connotation. Like they're pretty clear about that in the
Yeah.
podcast. And that's my biggest gripe. Like I think some of the things they mentioned do exist in some books, but I don't like the negative connotation of like, it's bad to read a book that makes you fist pump and happy. It's bad to read a book with younger characters, even though
Of
that's
course.
not everything in adults.
Mhm.
So I think it has YA vibes, and they said didactic, so it teaches you things or something.
Yeah.
Which, why is that
Has,
bad?
like, a
I don't know.
moral.
How dare.
out there. Yeah, I mean, I got
Moralistic
that too. I feel like it just sounds like they basically are saying like YA vibes, anything plot driven, like those kind of sci-fi, like sci-fi fantasy action driven novels.
I took
It's like
lots of notes.
But what did you say, Bethany?
I said I took lots of notes, so I can tell.
Yeah, I did too.
I mean, the way that
Every
they
time
about
they
it,
said
though,
it.
it's like they think those two things can exist at the same time, like the genre fiction that you just want to fist pump for, and then the literary where you just, you know, it's a deeper message, I guess, you can take away from it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of the things they said were uplifting, upbeat, didactic, YA-ish, with weirdly young, inexperienced, naive characters who haven't lived a life, as opposed to characters with a haunted past.
The characters are
Aspirational,
flat.
escapism, gentrified SFF.
They also
So-
made a huge point of it being particularly neoliberal in its ideology.
Neoliberal. Yes.
Neoliberal, it is attacking older works. So rather than like coming up with new ideas, it's like replaying old ideas, or like Ghostbusters, but with women was one of the examples they gave for
Mhm.
that.
Right. Although then
very-
she said she had never seen the movie.
Yeah, she said she never seen
I
it.
know.
Oh my God.
Well,
they
I
said
that-
want to make sure we're giving. I
reimaginings.
want to make sure we are not straw manning them, because
Sorry.
I feel like they
Right.
straw man other people. So
Good
they
point.
also
Good
say it's
point.
meta
Okay.
They don't
deconstructive.
like it if they don't like that they don't reference other literature, but then they also don't like it when they do reference other literature in order to like subvert or comment on that literature. So
We'll get.
Yeah.
We'll get
there's
there.
a good way and a bad
yes.
way to be referencing
Yeah.
literature.
It's middle brow in its lyricism. It has a
Right.
lack of emotional sincerity. It is snarky and, in their terms, bad humor with an early 2000s humor.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Escapist. It has token, and then the last thing I had was that it has token representation
Yeah.
rather than like meaningful representation.
Yeah. And that
So those
they,
are
they
all
that
things
it's
that can exist in a book.
Yeah.
I don't know that they actually prove that that is a thing, but like
yeah.
any
They
one
all-
of these things, it's like, yes, that is a thing that could exist in a
It's
book.
just so broad. It's
It
not
is.
there's
It
no
is.
concise, like you can't say like, give me a one line definition. They're like, oh no.
Yeah.
This is gonna take a while. And it shouldn't take that much to like define this term. So I'm gonna go back to the chat and see. I've seen a couple.
Someone
I don't know
mentioned-
why would you learn from a book? Please.
I took issue with them saying that you couldn't learn from a young protagonist, like teenagers had nothing to teach you, and I'm like, excuse me. Like,
Yes.
I don't like
so-
that at all. I have mentored teenagers and I have learned from them too. It's like a two-way street, and
Yeah.
that can still happen with
Well,
books.
also, the choice to center a young protagonist does not preclude the possibility that the narrative will have something meaningful that you can
Right.
learn from that happens to be experienced through the lens of this young person who is seeing it. So, like, it's just so reductive to imply that a teenager being the protagonist means there's nothing meaningful happening around them.
Yeah. So I guess my feeling was I do think that there are books like this that are getting published, and stories like this that are getting published.
Alexa
so,
said, "What kind of books I write?"
yes,
It's okay. It's not SFF. Well, I guess you have written SFF.
Yeah.
So like I do think that there are books that would fall under this that are getting published, but here's the thing, is the way it's posed is they call it insidious. They say it's dominant. This is like everywhere you look. It's all that's getting published in SFF broadly. But then by the end of the podcast, it becomes clear that they seem to be more narrowly talking about SFF short stories published in magazines.
Well, they describe this as like water to fish, that you don't even know that it's around you because it's so dominant.
Right.
They said a movement so ubiquitous it's nearly invisible, and I was
Right.
like,
Yeah. And my problem, well, so sorry. Do we think we've described what it is that they're
Yeah.
But this comment from EF Pendergast about you can't learn from young protagonists, Buildings Romans enters the chat.
Yeah, exactly. But I wanted to, because I know we all have a lot of negative feelings towards this podcast, so I wanted us to start with
Or
like
at
things
least-
that we agreed with that they said, because there were
Yes.
individual points that they made that if it weren't in the context of the bigger podcast,
Yeah.
I could get on board with or see a point that they had. It's the overall podcast, like, and how it all comes together. But
Yeah.
like,
Yes.
Okay, I have an
maybe
olive
could we start with
branch.
like things they said that we agree with?
I have an olive
Yes.
branch. If they framed this as them saying that these critiques that they specifically have are just reasons why they don't tend to read a lot of mainstream things because they feel like the mainstream waters things down, it gets gentrified, it gets corporatized, it gets whatever. Then in that sense, like I would be like, yeah, well, when you get into like mainstream things, when you get into what gets money thrown at it by big publishers, et cetera, that there's a clique, that there's, you got to know people, that you have to have money, like those are things that are true. And so if they were framing this whole discussion as like, if you're looking for meaningful stories, probably don't look at the mainstream, I'd be like, I would agree with that. But they were saying that like there are no meaningful stories because the mainstream aren't meaningful stories. And I'm like, when has the mainstream ever been like where you find the like genre defying and like revolutionary and like status quo punching fiction? That's not where you're ever going to find it, ever.
Yeah. I did think that part, because I think that is something that has been in publishing and is still like, there are people who just have more connections because of a certain privilege in life. And then that was a little part where I was like, okay, yeah, I can agree with you there.
Yeah.
But I mean, then they take it to the whole like calling the books written like there's some style of HR. They went on this whole thing, but like that is a thing that there are a lot of people in publishing who kind of just already have a leg up or a privilege, whether that's a connection, a school, or knowing somebody. And so that gets them in, and they maybe publish a book that's more similar to what's being written, when someone who would have a different perspective and a different story may not have that same privilege. So I was like, yeah, I can agree. I can agree with that.
Yeah. Well, and I think their whole thing about, that it requires some level of privilege in terms of the kind of job that you have to be able to be a writer in a lot of cases. Although I don't think that is new. Like, I think that
I was going to say it's true, but it's actually less bad now than it used to be. So for them pointing it out as a problem, it is a problem, but it is in fact better now than ever before. Accessibility to time and equipment and like resources to publish is so much more accessible to the common man than it ever was before. That like, is it perfect? No, but like it's really good right now compared to how it was.
Yeah, well, because like you think about like, okay, big writers in the 1800s like Dickens or like Jane Austen or whoever, like,
they cite Tolkien specifically, and Tolkien was like
Tolkien.
an Oxford,
an Oxford Don
professor.
Yeah,
like
all of these were people in academia, people with money, people who had time and space. So I just don't think that. So I think they're right that there are barriers to getting published and that there is a tendency for it to come from privileged people. I just don't think that it's new in the way that they seem to be saying. And I get the frustration with it. Like, it's valid to be frustrated that it's expensive and difficult to get into. I just don't think that is anything new.
I do think something positive I took. Well, it's not positive. I just think I don't agree with their interpretation of events, is that there is a trend in SFF and it is leading to more marginalized stories, which does sometimes have to teach people, because we're in a state of society where it's more mainstream to actually think about marginalized identities and how they exist in the world. That has become more mainstream, so that has been happening more. But I don't think SQUEECORE is a bad thing. I just disagree with that premise entirely, even if this was as ubiquitous as they claim, which I disagree. I just there are always trends, and I just don't think they've identified the trend. But even if this is the trend, I don't think it's bad.
Yeah, I mean, I actually have a number of things that, like, in isolation, I was okay, even if it was like not my personal opinion. I was like, yeah, I can see this. So like, I think that part of what they're actually talking about is like Twitter, not really books, which is this idea of like Twitter warriors, of like this huge emphasis on sort of like token representation or, you know, I get like, I'm trying to find a way to frame this that's not like the horrible alt-right version of this, but like, let's just go with like political correctness, like people being like, for instance, being more concerned with using a certain word rather than actually improving conditions for the people who that word refers to. Like, I think that that seemed to be a lot of where the critique was coming from. Like, I put more discomfort with material conditions rather than ideas. So like, I think they're trying to critique and say it's not enough to write about these ideas if you're not actually doing anything to try to progress the material conditions of the people who you're trying to help. So like, for instance, they've mentioned like mutual aid societies or like, what do you do? Well, they go off on a whole thing with Raython, but okay, anyway, but like Amazon and how it treats its workers, or like, I think that they're trying to critique this idea of like, if all you're doing is sitting on Twitter, or if you're like just writing a story about like, it's wrong for these people to be oppressed, but you don't actually do anything about it, then it's really hollow. And that I can like get on board with. I think if that's where they were trying to go, I agree with that.
But I also don't really know what that has to do with SQUEECORE.
Well, yes, I know. I'm trying to leave my criticisms for later, but I'm saying like that as an independent notion.
I was gonna say, like, as an idea, as a thing that has to do with SQUEECORE, I just how that is relevant is unclear.
Just in the podcast, we were just finding positives.
I'm trying to find, and I actually agree. I personally, oh, go ahead, Tori. Sorry.
Oh no, I'm trying to find a positive. I'm going back through my notes.
Well, okay, I share that sometimes I'm not in love with what they describe as sermon books. I think a more generous way to describe that would be issue books. I think sometimes if that's all the book is doing, I agree that I personally don't love that. But, you know, I can see that would be something somebody wouldn't like. And then I do agree with this. I thought it was actually an interesting connection that they were talking about the rise of meta fiction or like lampshading or deconstructive type literature with late stage capitalism. Like, I wish that they had like actually said that versus making me infer that, but I think that's where they were going, which was like basically late stage capitalism, like the 80s onwards, it does become increasingly self-referential because like our culture is kind of decaying and dying the way capitalism is, and so like our creative institutions somewhat do as well. And like this idea of, okay, like if I can just make this more inclusive, then it'll be good. And it's like, well, but it's not new. Do you know what I mean? Like that's, I think, part of where they were going with the whole Ghostbusters thing is like, can't you come up with a new idea rather than like, let me plug in, I think they were bringing the example of like a Latinx character into a book. And it's like, instead of doing that, why don't we tell an organic Latinx story? So I think that's just an ideological.
But like I have those
whole things. They are that drive me so crazy.
I know. I'm just saying that like I'm trying to be as generous as I can to them. That like I think that's at least I at least see where that idea comes from, and
the problem is they're just not right, because like they're saying this and like two huge books in the last couple of years were Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, The Inheritance for Orquídea Divina by Zoraida Cordova were both exactly what they were talking about for Latinx stories that were bestsellers.
I know. I'm just saying that like,
and they're
on
unapologetically Latinx. Like they're not trying to whitewash. They're unapologetically themselves.
And they were huge bestsellers. Like I mean, I know
saying
what
that the idea of like plug and play for like diversity X into old property.
Yeah. I mean, sure. Yeah, I get that as a problem.
I'm trying, Bethany. I'm trying to find.
I'm sorry.
Some like I want to demonstrate that we actually listened to them and tried to take them in good faith where we could.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. We've done that. We can now rage. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, but so like again, when you were just talking about the examples they gave, so they kept lamenting that current fiction writers, I don't know what their sources are on this, but current fiction writers, not a one of them reads books. All of their sources of inspiration are film and television, and then all of the examples that they could give of SQUEECORE were of film and television. So and then they categorically refused to give examples of, like, fiction
books that were published like 10 years ago that they thought were a couple. Okay, that was part of it. Is I was like, what are you reading? I don't feel like they're actually reading.
Well, I was saying to
things.
this, like she does say at one point, and horror is a superior genre. So I'm
Yeah,
like, so does
so
that
I
just
think
you
they're- I
think
think
SFF
they're-
is bad
so
in the
I
first
think
place?
they're
Why are you talking about it?
I think they're lumping horror in with like with SFF. I think they're like lumping in all the speculative
That's
fiction.
what I took. Yeah, that they're kind of just putting any kind of speculative fiction
like
together.
they go off on this whole rant about the idea of like Red Shirts, which is a book by John Scalzi, and like, yeah, and it won the Hugo a couple years ago. I'm like, a couple years ago? It won the Hugo in 2013, 9 years ago, which means he was probably writing it in like 12 years ago. I'm like, this is your reference for like people reusing the same thing, something that happened more than a decade ago. There were several things like that where they're like, yeah, and this thing, and I'm like, that was like 6 years ago.
Like it sounds like you're talking about Ready Player One, which came out like 10 years ago, 15
Someone
years
did
ago.
mention that book is what came to mind. But yeah, I kept trying to think of, and they do mention some books. Not many. They really have a thing with Chuck Wendig. They don't like him.
They do
I
not
don't.
like
they
Chuck
hate
Wendig.
I don't know
Yeah.
what. I don't know what he
also-
did to them.
I know we did this like good faith thing of like, you know, here's some good points of what they said, but I just want to say something that really pissed me off in the very beginning and set me up to hate this. And there's a very bad faith thing for them to do, or at least for her to do, because she's the one that said it, saying that SQUEECORE is a movement, and it is, as a movement, has an ideology, but it is an ideology that they refuse to acknowledge or define, and that is insidious because it means that they refuse to allow anyone to suggest that there's an alternative. So it is this like organized conspiracy theory idea of like, we have banded together to make SQUEECORE dominant and nothing else will be allowed. And it literally, she uses the word insidious. And I was like, to say that you've noticed a trend that you don't tend to enjoy very much is different from saying that there's a conspiracy to keep you, the voice of subversion, out.
And Danny, I don't disagree that this is what they actually did, but this is not what they said they were doing. And that's part of the problem. Like for me, at least. I'm like, if they had just been like, here are things in media that I don't like.
Yeah.
I could have been much more into this.
They were just so vague. And I think part of the problem too is they said SFF in books writ large, but then it's like you get to the end of the podcast and you realize that all they're talking about is short fiction.
Yeah, they don't even go into
they did-
grimdark. They're
he
just like no grimdark. We're not going to talk about a major part of fantasy.
They're
Bye.
like,
He said,
that doesn't count.
No, he
towards what
said
we're
he
talking
likes grimdark and that he really likes R.F. Kuang's Poppy War trilogy. So they shouted that out as like a good thing. So,
but then they did. But then he was like, but I'm not going to get into that kind of because it's undercutting their whole argument. The fact that there is so much grimdark getting published right now undercuts their whole argument that this is insidious and everywhere and dominating the space.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yes. Yeah, you could say it's a thing because some of these books they exist, but to say it's like this overwhelming majority, or like when they say insidious, I just envision like a creeping virus that's like just creeping through all of the books and science fiction and fantasy, and they're tainting all of the quality fiction that we have. And it's like, well, there are those books and then there are not those books. So
I mean, and I think there are things. I mean, like arguably you could call Becky Chambers SQUEECORE. I don't think that's a bad
That's
thing.
one of the authors that's in the category they mentioned. I went back and looked up the nominees of like, all the nominees for this category, and she was.
They
on the
said
list
They said she isn't in short fiction though. It was only short fiction.
Oh, I thought they were talking about the novellas.
No, they said.
Okay, then their
fiction.
argument makes even less sense to me.
Yeah. No, I went and wrote them all. I went and wrote them all down too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I thought that we were including P. Djeli Clark and Shauna McGuire and
that's
the
novella. Like everything they mentioned was like short stories and like all the short fiction. So,
but so we kind of all talked about this when we were talking before this live about how all of this falls apart for the simple reason that they never use qualifying language like from what I've read, from what I've seen. They talk as if they have read everything that there is to read. And this is impossible because despite what they claim about the bars to entry, more things are being published than ever before. So there is just more fiction out there that they couldn't possibly have had time to read it all because there is so much being published. So of the slice of it that they have seen, perhaps this is true of everything that they have picked up, in which case I'm sorry to hear that they're having bad luck picking books. But like the idea that they've read enough of it to have a sample that is like indicative of the whole, when there is so much being published, despite what they say about bars to entry, is just, like, that's why this falls apart. If they simply said, from what I've read, from what I've seen,
Right.
but they don't.
So I would like to say that when I first listened to this, when my friend texted me, I had more of I didn't have a big reactive feeling to it. I was like, interesting. I mean, I can see that. That's kind of weird. And I maybe took it more like this. And then I was looking on Twitter, and there were just varying takes. I read some blog posts. I mean, part of them, some of them were long, Jesus. And then talked to a couple people who I felt like, I talked to Angela, and she was like, no, this is incorrect. And then like talking to someone else. So I definitely had my first listen definitely, I guess, gave them more benefit of the doubt, or like could see more of where they were coming from. Then listening to these ladies here, re-listening to it, I was like, I don't know if this is holding up or making much sense when I'm going back through it. So I think like, again, like what everyone has said here, if they would speak from their personal experience, or like literally say these books, and I don't like these books, which is fair. You don't have to like this type of fiction, because I think at first I was like, yeah, I mean, I could see that. I don't like reading super hopeful things all the time either, but that doesn't mean they're bad. But they say it like almost every single book, except these 4 people that are coming out in science fiction and fantasy in the last 5-something years, are SQUEECORE, and they're bad. And so I think that's like, even if they were doing it hyperbole, I mean, you put it out for a general audience, so people may stumble upon it and not know your history or how you typically speak about things, and be like, oh, this is what what the genre is, or even in media, even with movies, that's just like very broad.
Well, and like Jess, I talked to you about this when you first brought it up. What frustrated me is that, so say you don't like this thing, your choice as a consumer of media is to go find the thing this is not like. And even in short story space, I've read 3 huge anthologies that have come out in the last 2 years of short stories. So if these are short story people that are nothing like this, like they wanted dark, creepy things, they wanted older protagonists, they wanted real diversity, not token. Sunspot Jungle 1 and 2 exists. New Suns anthology exists. They're not reading it. They're choosing not to read that. And then I got annoyed when I thought it was about more books, because I'm like, I literally scream into the void on my small channel about all of these underrated, diverse books that no one picks up because it's not what is mainstream. So it's just like, if you actually want something that's not mainstream, go find it. It is there.
But that's where I also I just kept writing down every time they said stuff like this, that like I can't reconcile why they seem to be like baffled at the mainstream being mainstream, and they keep like railing against the mainstream being the most main of streams. And I'm like, what are you expecting to find like in the mainstream? In fact, the mainstream, this is as diverse as it's ever been. And like, is it the watered down version by the time it gets to the mainstream? Yeah, it super is. But it's more diverse than it's ever been before. And like them acting like back in the day, the mainstream was so subversive. And I'm like, well, in order to subvert something, in order to like rebel against something, in order to be a revolutionary, which they seem to want you to be, there has to be a mainstream that you are butting against. And that's what you seem to like, is the revolution. It's like people complaining about pop music not being the like songs of revolution of like the like anti-government Bob Dylan-esque type stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but that was never the establishment. Anti-establishment literature, anti-establishment music is never going to be produced by the establishment. And I don't know why you're expecting it.
I guess I also just feel like, sorry.
I was gonna say, I thought Tori was trying to jump in there, and we're all so chatty.
So I had a thought a while back about like, just on another level, it's kind of insulting. This is the most diverse that we've seen it in a really long time in the publishing industry, and that we do have so many diverse mainstream stories. So for them to be using words throughout the entire episode, like, all SFF is morally hollow right now. These stories are insidious. And it's just like, I mean, what Angela was saying, like, what are you reading? What have you picked up lately? So,
yeah. Well, and I think that's part of it, is that like traditional publishing is putting out stuff that is more their vibe. So I'm wondering if they're just not reading it. And I was even looking, because I did look at like who were some of the, like, what were the novellas that were nominated last year, and like one of them was Rye Baby by Tochio Nobuchi, and like I
Yeah.
mean, which is like the exact opposite of everything they're talking about. I
Yeah.
just don't know that they actually
A lot
read
of the
it.
Yeah, a lot of the books that were nominated for the Hugo Nebula Awards last year are the complete opposite
Yeah.
of what they are talking about the
Right.
entire episode.
Well, and I think about
Who
like
did y'all look for?
NK Jemisin winning 3 Hugos in a row, and like her
Exactly.
books are not like what they're talking about. Okay, this. So I guess I
This
just
just
think
won the Newbery, a Latinx SFF story.
Yeah.
But so there was a
Well,
moment in the podcast where he literally said a thing that I was like, that is the opposite of the point you're trying to make, and yet you've made the perfect case for why what's going on is like a net positive. And he was saying how, like, because they were talking about, is the token diversity, you know, better than the alternative? And yes, it is. And he was saying, yeah, well, if you take like a silly, insignificant story with token characters that are like cardboard cutouts and they're all white versus the same thing and they're all like diverse characters, obviously that one is better because it has like a more better representation of like real life, or like you do see a more diverse cast. And I was like, so then that's literally why the mainstream is better now than it's ever been before, because you just said like, okay, cookie cutter boring stories, they're all bad, but it's slightly better if at least those cookie cutter stories have a diverse cast. And that's like what has happened in mainstream publishing, is that we went from like boring and all white to boring and now diverse, which is like you just said is still better. Like that is a net positive.
It's a step up. Does anyone, I don't know if I've heard of hope punk vaguely, but I don't like have a definition. Is there a,
I
does
mean,
I have
anyone
no
know?
idea.
it's kind of like, I feel like there's a lot of crossover, honestly.
Mm.
Like hope punk is I mean, honestly, that might be kind of what they're talking about, as things that would fall more under the hope punk genre.
So is that just like hopeful things?
Yeah, it's like, it's like a hopeful future. Okay, like I would say Becky Chambers writes hope punk. Like she writes SFF that is very much like hopeful, character driven kind of stuff, I think.
Yeah, the Wikipedia article says it has characters fighting for positive change, radical kindness, and communal responses to challenges.
It's like
Okay.
the Robot and T-Monk series that Becky Chambers is putting out. Like that's a great example of hope punk. So I do feel like they would probably argue, especially because they're scared of feelings. They think they should just go to therapists for them. Which I
They
was like,
literally, you guys, they literally said that feelings are for therapy or the lower classes. This is how they characterize the people they're critiquing, which I get they were probably being hyperbolic,
Yeah.
but like, okay, can I go off on like
What is
the
solar
contradiction
punk?
that just drove me crazy in
Yes,
this?
let it out.
Okay, so
Yeah.
they spend so much time in the first half of this, and you heard me. I was trying to give them credit. Like in itself, it could be okay.
You were much nicer to them than they were to SQUEECORE readers.
I was
I
trying
mean-
so hard. They go on and on about how fiction, all of this fiction is so black and white. It's so didactic. There's like good, bad, and no in between. That's not how life is. Ba 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 ba. Okay, so they go on and on about that. Fiction should be morally gray in their opinion. Then we get to the Raytheon and Amazon, and they literally say you are too cowardly to confront true moral evil in the real world. And I'm like, okay, so what you're saying is that in the fictional world it should be gray, but in real life all
Black and
issues
white.
are morally black and white. I'm like,
Yes.
what child's fantasy world are you living in where like authors get to take a huge stance against Amazon?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, give me a fucking break. Like,
even,
the
like, the
world is
issue-
nothing if not morally gray, and yet, like, you castigated this entire alleged genre for being too easy
I was gonna say, like,
and
they
too
really go
spoon-fed.
they go
Which
after
was
the whole
not fair.
Amazon thing, and Amazon is a great example of a gray issue because we were talking about accessibility to publishing, and because of things like Kindle Unlimited, then you're able to get your words in front of eyes more easily than ever before. Is it perfect? Is there a dark side to how that
Yes.
all works and how
Yeah.
the money behind
Yes.
this? Yes,
Yeah.
but like that's why it's like a
It's,
gray
like,
issue because like
impossible
But it's
to
a gray
avoid.
issue.
They host like the majority of the internet. Like it's so impossible to avoid, especially if you don't have money to somehow get around all these different things. And then, so S.A. Chakraborty was at that Hugo Awards, and she is the one I saw mention the
Oh, I
Renaissance
saw
on
her.
Twitter. So I'm like, so you are lying, because it's not like, I mean, they were at this award show, and I don't think they knew, or at least most authors didn't know beforehand that this was the sponsor. So that's not fair to them. And then she did say afterwards, like, you know, grateful for this, whatever, this convention being put together, but can we talk about this? I'm like, so did you check on every single author that was there? Because she did bring it up about, like, that's problematic.
There were others too. She wasn't the only one who commented on it. Like, because I went and searched Twitter too when they made that whole thing about, like, none of the authors could even tweet after the fact about how bad it was. And I'm like, well, some of them did. Some of them did.
I was like, this is pretty astonishing to me that you're sitting here essentially like moralizing about how, I mean, and I should say that was part of the tone, like this is a little bit of tone policing, but the posture of the podcast was very like, we are speaking from on high, we are the objective, rational ones speaking into this void of, you know, morass, terrible, whatever. And for them to then take the position, and this gets into the professionalization conversation, which I also want to come back to, and I think folds into this, which is like, you want to live in a dream world in the real world, and then you want gritty realism in your fiction. Well, then why do you have a problem with somebody who's the opposite, which is, I want to live in a dream world in my fiction, but I'm okay with like morally gray things in the real world. It just,
I mean, to speak to the black and whiteness, like it is, I hadn't thought of it in those terms before, but the fact that, they to complain about how SQUEECORE is so black and white and that things are more gray than that. And yet they're painting all of publishing black and white, because everything that's being published is SQUEECORE now. And everything that is not SQUEECORE is barred from entry. And that's quite black and white as a description of the situation. So,
yes. I started this comment.
I'm sorry, I'm reading the comment section too.
I know. There's a lot happening in the comments. It's really interesting.
Not to mention minority voices.
So, like, I think there was also, I don't know, it was just interesting because I feel like there was a lot of like back and forth on, they went from saying like getting upset at this posturing of like reading a story as a reading or writing a story as a political act, and they were like, it's a story, it accomplishes nothing. But then they said, well, but then like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair gave us the FDA, so it can accomplish something.
And they also, even before that, they seem to be upset that SQUEECORE doesn't want to say anything meaningful, that SQUEECORE is just a happy-go-lucky story. You should be wanting to say something. But also, who cares if you read a book, because books are meaningless and they don't change anything, unless you're Upton Sinclair, in which case they do change something. And I'm like, so it does matter? No, it doesn't matter. No, it does matter.
Like what?
And that could have been like one of my tiny positives, where I do agree that a lot of people will read books and increase their empathy and increase their knowledge and never take anything a step further. Like that definitely happens. There are definitely people like that, but that is still better than people who never acquire the empathy. Like again.
So also for a reality check for these authors who are like, all of these SQUEECORE people just want to live in a fantasy world. Look, the truth is the majority of like humanity is not going to be like revolutionary activists. That is just, those are the exceptions. But in order for there to be widespread change in the world, you have to have the sheep that compose the world, who are not the active like movers and shakers, to generally like shift their tone of thinking so they're receptive to the messages of like new leaders. And so if everyone is reading more diversely, if everyone is reading books that shine lights on more marginalized experiences, then no, that person didn't get up and like run for office and change the world. No, that person didn't like petition to have something changed. No, that person didn't go and volunteer somewhere. But because everybody now is like getting more of a taste of important issues, that sets the scene for the movers and shakers to actually create real change. So them acting like this like individualism is like, you have to be this revolutionary who like writes this book, but then also like takes up the sword and fights the oppressor that is the mainstream. But the mainstream should also be the ones who are doing the rallying cry against itself, I guess. I don't
mainstream. So I wanted to go to the diversity point. Like I have feelings on it because I myself have a lot of feelings, especially on current fiction that's by traditional young adult authors that are Black, that have been very much I feel like it's been like The Hate U Give started a trend where those are the books that do tend to get pushed by publishers or get more attention, the ones that are more like the issue book or the something. And so when I first listened and they were talking about like, you know, like that, like this is not a revolutionary act or you just writing, I kind of thought about that, but I don't know how to.
No,
I think Danny also said, like, I'm not trolling. Like, you have a lot of great comments.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good
They're
comments.
just go ahead,
No,
Tori.
I get
Sorry.
what you mean though about the diversity aspect of it, and I feel like this podcast episode doesn't. I don't know. It's like they want there to be like an important issue book for these stories to be meaningful, and I feel like the episode and the things that they're talking about don't give space for, you know, stories by Black authors, other marginalized authors that are not these kinds of stories.
Yes. And then someone said, even if they're cookie cutter, like they deserve to be there. And I think that's like an important thing that a lot of people talk about on Twitter, but that when people are like, oh, is that just a Six of Crows? If it, you know, like someone comes up with a heist story or another, and it's like, well, these people haven't been able to tell these stories, so now they get to have their take on it. Maybe this is their Beauty and the Beast retelling. And so I do think, because even if those generally, overwhelmingly, I am not enjoying young adult books as much as I used to, there is an audience for them who will enjoy those, or maybe that's their first like foray into reading, so it's not boring to them, or that's, you know, their first. I don't know. I just think media, even if we're talking outside of books, is so wide, and like people are going to reach it at different points in their lives or coming in for different things, for them to just be like, this is good and this is bad, but also there's gray. Is weird.
So like reading isn't revolutionary and your book isn't a revolutionary act and it doesn't matter, but also, I mean, it clearly matters to them a great deal. But also like just thinking again about the fact that like when I was in school, we were being made to read Catcher in the Rye. And I know that friends of mine who are teachers now, who are English teachers, are having their students read The Hate U Give and things like that. And the idea that that is the story, like these are the stories that are being put forth as worthy literature that like people see themselves represented in, or even if they don't see themselves, the fact that they see someone who doesn't look like themselves for once represented, like that is a big change. That is a big deal. So like to crap on that and say it doesn't matter when it does, like not maybe on the individual level, but on a widespread level, if this is what generally people are being exposed to, that is a big change.
Well, and isn't part of what we're reaching for, and I mean this like with complete seriousness and respect, I am not trolling, isn't what we're reaching for that mediocre queer people, mediocre non-white people, mediocre whatever marginalization can thrive?
Yeah.
Like that's part, I mean, yes, some of these things might be cookie cutter, but like, don't people who are marginalized have the right to be cookie cutter? Like, why does every book have to be like the book? I mean, I just think that to me would be much closer to true like equity, is that there's like range of good representation, bad whatever, like that it's just, it all exists, and no one book has to be like, this is the Black book of the year.
Like if they were talking about how like if people think that, you know, we've made it, we still have so far to go, if that's what they were trying to say, I'd be like, yes, I totally agree. If anyone thinks that we've solved it, like, you know, no, we have a long way to go. But the way that they talk, it's the same kind of talk that you get when it comes to like political conversations, when people, oh, the good old days. And that's how they framed this entire conversation. Oh, the good old days when books were good. And I'm like, okay, but the things you're complaining about, such as like access to publishing and having diverse and marginalized voices represented, what was the good old days when those things were so much better?
Yeah. Well, it's like this, there seems to be a romanticization of like books being more metal. And I'm like, are you Gen Xers?
It was very Gen X. Oh my gosh. Okay, so and also just all the things that they were talking about.
Can you please just read this comment really fast?
I saw that we can define that. We can come up with SQUEECORE as a.
We're changing the definition of SQUEECORE.
But like they list all these preferences, and I was like, yeah, this seems very Gen X.
It sounds
to me.
very Gen X.
They're like,
it was funny. Yeah.
Okay, issue books are bad because like Gen X is traditionally very like cynical. Purple prose is good, so like angst. I'm a leftist, or like centrism is bad. Like this gets back to the professionalization thing. I think that they're demonizing professionalization. It reminds me of a TikTok I recently saw about how in the 90s, there was this huge emphasis on selling out in art that I don't think we have anymore.
Yeah.
And that seems to be kind of what they're talking about, is this idea of like material success of some kind is selling out.
Yeah.
And I just don't, I think that that's kind of a
Well, she says at one point, anyone that gets
notion.
into fiction, she's like, if anyone gets into fiction to make money, that's a joke. And I'm just like, why?
Yeah.
Well, also like the idea that like you would like your get rich quick scheme is to become an SFF author is pretty hilarious to me.
It is
which
funny,
is what they seem to be positing.
Like, I don't think anybody actually does that. Like, that's interesting.
Like, but anyway, I think that they seem to be putting
they
forward
said they
their
wanted
preferences, their aesthetic preferences as like this is a thing, and I just don't. I was very confused by why that was the position they were trying to argue.
Because they were saying, they were like, please, people like Ray Bradbury and Burroughs and like these white men from back, like had greater variety.
Back when publishing was diverse.
Right. They're like strange. They said they had strange, broken weirdos as their characters, and things felt more metal, and like people were willing to feel real and big emotions, and like okay, like but these are like preferences more. Like this isn't.
Oh, that's fine, but it's just a preference.
It's fine. Yeah, like there's nothing wrong with liking that, but like that is a preference, not that like things getting published now are degrading sci-fi fantasy as a genre. I don't know. It was interesting.
And like it definitely today in adult SFF. So I don't read a lot of YA. So I'm like I think I don't know. Tori, Leanne, and I think read the most adult, and then you don't read as much YA anymore either, Mara. But like
me either, honestly.
I guess that's true. When I found your channel, you were reading more.
No, I was reading. I used to read a lot more. I read some, but I read a lot more.
But like, so I've been reading adult SFF even before BookTube, and like I went to my bookstore all the time, and like even in the last 4 years, I cannot tell you how many more books by like Black people of color authors and speculative fiction. It's just shot up, because I do agree that like it shouldn't just be white people inserting diverse characters. It also needs to be diverse authors getting to be on the shelves. 100%. Unfortunately, they still don't get picked up as much because people pick them up and they're like, this is not my tropes. Like, I don't know what this book is. Like,
or they don't know the name. They're like, these aren't the 5 people that I know.
So one of my favorite authors is Nikki Drayden, and her highest book has like 4,000 ratings on Goodreads. And like that's the book I want to send to the podcast. It's like, you want weird stuff? Do you want weird stuff? Let me give you.
No, they want the mainstream to be the non-mainstream.
Yeah, that's what's weird. It's because if mainstream, I mean, that's just like if you took romance.
There's no world
they
in which the mainstream is what they want.
SFF. They're talking about SFF, but in romance, in contemporary. When I want something that's, more out there, more steep, less rules, and I'm gonna go indie. It's like, so do you want everything is not gonna, it just doesn't make sense. Everything can't be the minority, can't be the majority, or the mainstream.
What they are is hipsters.
What metal? I don't know. Did they have, besides the Poppy War, did they have any specific books that they referred to?
I mean, they did like Carmen Maria Machado, who is good. Like,
she's great.
Love her books.
Yeah.
But I also wouldn't say they're like the creepiest, weirdest things I've ever read.
Like,
I mean,
you cannot fail and grow.
They're very good, though. Like,
I love this comment in the side. It says, I wouldn't say the goal is mediocrity. The goal is for equality, having a wide variety of stories that reflect different experiences. Not white people write bad books, so BIPOC people should too.
And I guess that was what I was trying to say. I just meant that, like, if we get to a point where there's so much diversity that you don't even notice necessarily, like, oh, this was a good, like, I feel like publishing has this thing where, like, here's our Black book for the year. So like it has to be the highest quality and nothing below that is getting published along with it. That's what I mean, is that if there was actually range for marginalized authors, rather than like, okay, we're buying one book from an Indigenous author this year, so it better be a good one. That was more what I meant, but I totally agree with this.
Yeah, and that's the one, but they do that for various marginalizations, and then they put all their money towards that, and then there's all these other ones that they're like, no, but this is this is the one this year.
Yeah.
Old adult.
But no, I agree. Like mediocrity is never a goal. I guess I just mean like white men get to be mediocre and get praised as it being awesome, and like everybody should have the luxury of being mediocre. Like,
So,
I guess
know,
that's kind of where I was going.
One of the big contradictions, at least as far as I can tell, in their argument that it just drove me nuts, is that they go on this weird rant towards the beginning about how and I wrote it down. They said these writers have only ever been the customers, not the customer service representative, meaning that they are very elitist and that they have money. And this goes back to the whole, like, they have time to write, they have the money, they have the connections. However, then later on, when they're talking about what used to be good, is that they used to be these really educated people that, like, Tolkien had read the Icelandic sagas, and that Ursula K. Le Guin was like studying anthropology. And I was like, what does that have to do with your argument? You're saying that this should be like these marginalized voices that are like working class and that have like lived rough, but they should also have like a doctorate in like all these like literary things that you want them to be referencing. That, like, you can't, which is it? Like, do you want elites writing about elite things, referencing other elite things? Or do you want like the man off the street who can like tell you the story that he might have been inspired by the Marvel movie he saw and that's what got him to write? Like, God forbid you're inspired by film and television. I don't know what they want, honestly.
Well, and they couldn't stop referencing A Song of Ice and Fire and George Martin. He got brought up at least 5 times, and he's a very pivotal author, so like I don't disagree. But a lot of my favorite scenes in that series are SQUEECORE scenes. I'm fist pumping. I'm like, oh my gosh, that just happened. How dare? Like, and that's part of their definition of SQUEECORE is the moments that make you squee. Like, they did say that in this podcast. Yeah. And then they would mention classic fantasy and all the stuff they loved there. And I'm like,
Monica.
Those are also SQUEECORE.
And that working class writers shouldn't write to make money.
That made me so mad. People should get paid for work, and I don't understand.
It's not art if you're making money from it.
That was very much what I felt like. Again, the sellout vibe of just like, that also, like, they're the ones
you're selling out working class people, because they're saying only the rich seem to have like the luxury of writing. We want everyone to be writing, but also you shouldn't make money from it. So really, only the rich who have the luxury to write and not make money from it should be writing based on that definition. Like, what?
Yeah. When I was re-listening and they were talking about, neoliberalism, and I'm not smart, I'm not well versed. So in things,
I'm sorry, Garamond, stop.
What happened? They want the rough truck driver, mechanic, everyman who has a PhD in Anglo-Saxon linguistics.
Yeah, but that is kind of what they want. It's like I want you to be super educated, and then I want you to like be a real worker, like working with your hands, and it's just like
basically, like, honestly, how they make fun of like romance novels for having this impossible hero who is like buff and like
so big,
so strong,
like
but he's also very sensitive and very smart, and he's just like
so
this
big.
Like list of things that you couldn't possibly be all of those things. That's their ideal writer, and the mainstream should be this writer that doesn't exist. Then it'll be perfect.
Yeah, I was very... Yes. They also made some generalizations about working class people, which really burned my butter, because like my family comes from a very poor... Like, for instance, I know that this is just a throwaway that stuck out to me. Well, they talked about like, well, working class people are direct. And I'm like, okay, well, you've never met a poor Southern person then. Like, what do you... They just had so many generalizations.
They were very much
class
just
that were
like
very
a New York experience.
It was and that kind of bugged me a little bit, honestly, too, because I had notes on this somewhere. Oh yeah, they said yelling is the normal sound. It's not abuse. It's just direct. And I'm like, what? I'm like, but is it
could
not
be
abuse?
I mean, like in some cultural
sometimes.
contexts, it probably is, but like in the South, I don't know. I mean, like, you don't yell. You just are very non-confrontational, but like, you talk about people behind each other's back.
Right.
Just,
Bless your heart.
And I also
bless your heart.
Yeah. I mean, like, my family was also working class, and like my in-laws were working class. So, I mean, I do also think that some of us maybe are like the children of working class people who've been able to like do other things because we came from working class families. But like, I don't know, it's interesting.
Sorry, Jess, you were making a point about neoliberalism.
No, I was more like asking because I understand what it is, but I don't understand what they were saying. Are they saying like, I don't understand what they were bringing up neoliberalism in regards to.
I was going to say, I think in my notes
they...
when I wrote down neoliberalism, I was like, what this has to do with SQUEECORE? Unclear.
Well, no, okay, here's the argument I think they were making. And I want to say, I am a leftist, so like, I don't even disagree with their critiques of centrism or neoliberalism. I have a problem with the fact that they conflate that as like the only good kind of literature. Anyway, sorry, side note. Okay, I think what they were saying is that in the neoliberal centrist perspective, like it's basically benevolent capitalism, right? So like capitalism is still good. We just have to we have to harness capitalism to the ends that we want, which is like, we want more diversity. So like, let's make capitalism work for that. That's kind of, I think, what they were going for. So this idea of like, let's make mainstream, profitable fiction work for these ends that we want. And what leftism would say is that capitalism itself is intrinsically oppressive and cannot be fully harnessed to do that. So it's sort of like it's a hollow
But
pursuit.
Honestly, I can't think of any SFF that is very pro-capitalist. But they were like, they're all very like pro-capitalist, and I'm like, where? When?
Yeah.
When does that even come up?
Well, that's
usually
part of the
dragons
problem
and swords.
the part of the problem is that there were just so few examples given, and I get that like they didn't want to make people mad, but like there were no specificity. Like they mentioned, and I don't know, like early on they mentioned a story that they didn't like that was like the I want to talk to a manager vibe, and I looked it up because I was like, what is this? I've never even heard of it. Cold Calculation. So it's about it was a short story that was in a magazine by Amy Ogden, who then did a novella with Tor.com called Sun Daughters and Sea Daughters, which was a queer Little Mermaid retelling, which sounds like something they would hate. So like, I don't know if it's just that they didn't like, so I can't tell because it sounds like they try to write short SFF fiction and are having trouble with it. And sometimes it comes across as like, are you just like bitter because you're having a hard time and you don't like that people writing things you find annoying are being more successful? Like, is that, I don't know.
I mean, it honestly, it smacks of people who like say things that are, less liberal leaning in public spaces, and then because they don't gain a following, they say I'm being shadow banned and I'm being shut down by like no, you're not. Like maybe it's just not that good.
Have we moved to the point where we can talk about how this is all clearly just like sour grapes and personal beef? Because we've been taking their argument, we've been trying to take their argument seriously, but like at the end of the podcast, it becomes pretty clear. That this is personal beef.
This is the same person I'm thinking of, Raquel, because I went to Twitter and her photo is different, but I'm pretty sure this is the same person. And they do mention Isabel Fall in the podcast. And there was something that happened with Isabel Fall, who is a trans woman who wrote a short story, the helicopter story. And so it got brought up again last year, and then like N.K. Jemisin and all this stuff. I don't know if y'all remember it coming back up, but if this is the same person, this Raquel, because I think that she just has a personal vendetta against people who are more popular because she was like going for N.K. Jemisin and saying things that were literally false. And I'm just like, if you are the same person, then you are just bitter because it just seems like you're mad that what you've done hasn't got enough, even though, what does she call herself? The most dangerous woman on the internet or something?
So the most dangerous woman in fiction? I don't know. Something.
She says something, and I'm like,
something like
it's
that
on
in
her
Twitter
website.
bio.
Well, and again, I mean, throughout she's worse about it than he is, but they make statements of opinion as statements of fact. So they'll, instead of saying this is what I like, they say that is what is good. Instead of saying this is what I've read, they say this is what is being published. So like, that's just, and so I did want to like throw a bone to like, there was a moment towards the end when he said the thing that I've been waiting for them to say the whole time, which is exactly that. So like, she says something about how every single short story nominated for a Hugo was SQUEECORE. And he said, of the ones I've read, yes, but I can't speak for all of them. And I was like, yes!
finally.
Sentence
Yeah.
of the entire episode.
Also, for anyone watching this,
she did also complain in the podcast episode about nobody wanting to interview her about her blog article, which part of me was kind of like, well, listening to this, I wonder if maybe you kind of like made them not want to work with you. Like, if I don't know, it was interesting, but that was a thing also.
Yeah, who gave you this title? Yourself?
Yeah, I mean, and again, I take the point that like there can be cliquishness. That's that's just human beings, right? So like, I'm totally willing to believe that there's cliquishness. I just don't know that you can conflate that to like a movement that is like out to get you, which is kind of how it ended the podcast feeling.
Yeah.
and just so everyone knows, we just really wanted to complain about this podcast. That is the purpose of this video.
Yeah, that is true. But we were very clear about
yes.
that. Yeah, I'm not conflating that this is like a movement against SQUEECORE.
No.
Yeah.
We're even okay with the idea that maybe it exists, although we sort of hate the name for it because it's, as they said in the beginning of the podcast, a disparaging term. I love how they acknowledged it. And then they were like, but some people might gladly be referred to as liking SQUEECORE.
I don't mind the idea of squeeing.
Squeeing with. I was looking through my notes of other just brief things they define SQUEECORE as. So that no room for negative space, it's self-important, it rejects ambiguity, it's has tidy and neat endings, but also weird vagueness. Like I think in the podcast they said like instead of using one word, they use three. Or
and they don't describe the food people are eating.
Yeah, which I do love food descriptions, so I agree. I'm mad at that. I want to know what they're eating. And then they said it's comfort fiction with, the state of the world. And I'm like, but isn't that nice to have sometimes? Like, that's when
we're living on a dying planet. Come on.
A spinning rock.
She also, in the same time when she talked about the food, she took great issue. And again, made it sound like this is just factually, this is good, this is bad, not like a personal preference. About some book she had read where some girl in it is reading a SFF book, but that the author didn't specify which SFF book that she is reading.
Why
and
not
this
tell us
is
Alice in Wonderland?
Because we would learn so much about who this girl is if we were told, is she reading Alice in Wonderland? Is she reading Lord of the Rings? And I was like, maybe. Or, it might actually be a very deliberate choice on the author's part and not just to be vague and inoffensive and squee. But like, I personally, most of the time hate it if a book is going to directly, specifically cite real existing things. That takes me out of the story. That can date it depending on when that was published. And like, unless your book is going to be in some way like riffing on the themes and purposely be in conversation with that book that you're citing, like why are you including a specific name if that's not important to your story? If you're just saying, oh, she's an SFF reader, that's what I want to get across, is that she's generally interested in fantasy. Unless you're going to be like examining Alice in Wonderland in the text of your own story and therefore want to call out that that's what she's reading, there's no point in bringing it up. And so her saying, well, that's a missed opportunity and it's objectively wrong to not have told us what she's reading, I'm like, I disagree.
Yeah. Exactly. I want comfort. Usually when I'm like, ugh, I want something comforting. I usually then read a romance or something that, is left. They also said, because I was writing these notes while listening to it the first time, that you have to scrape and simper. You have a blue check on social media and you look the other way while your friends do shady shit. You pay your dues and then become successful. And I'm just like, yeah, this feels real personal.
Yeah, it felt like somebody like,
oh my god, sorry, bibliophile, jeez.
Okay.
Oh wait, sorry, I got distracted. Oh, so it makes it flow.
Books about white people dating opposite genders comfort.
Oh god.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Well,
I feel like
She was already getting on my list for the Jemison stuff. But like also, in the podcast, they're like, we never have characters who've lived a life. And I'm like, you were just talking about a Hugo book that no one remembers really. And there were 3 Hugo books in a series where we literally watch a mom who has lived a life.
Well, also,
yeah, what is squee about the Broken Earth trilogy?
I know, right? Nothing is squee about it. Oh my gosh.
For those of you who've read The Goblin Emperor, I was surprised that was the title they pulled as an example, because it's one of the only concrete examples they give.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cozier than And I mean, I guess I could see it as it is pretty cozy, and it does have a
hopeful and didactic.
I didn't
it's
finish
very
it, so I don't know.
yeah.
But-
So I mean, like, I guess I could see, but it surprised me. That wasn't what I was picturing
it's
when
not
they were
about-
describing SQUEECORE.
It's not about a 40-year-old has-been with a drinking problem. Therefore,
It is about a
SQUEECORE.
young person without much lived experience.
How
So
dare
I guess
T.A.
there's
Summers needs to
that.
write this fan fiction.
But I also think
it's
it's
also
issue
Huh.
that it's doing
Okay.
a thing.
I
But
mean,
like doing
Danny,
what?
if this is what they were trying to do, you just summed it up better than they did in an entire podcast. Because like I could get on board with this. Like I kind of get what you're saying when you say that.
mhm.
But also, this definition of what it is also not the same thing as the larger point they're making, which is that this is dominant and overarching and the only thing being published.
Right.
Which I think like none of
Yeah.
us would be taking any issue, maybe a little bit, but like if they said SQUEECORE is a thing that is being published and this is a particular variety of what is currently popular that we're not fans of, this is why. But instead, they're like, this is all that's being published. These are the overlords, the SQUEECORE overlords, and this is all they will publish. This is all they will read, and we must fight the system. And I'm like, what system? No, like, no.
Yeah.
Well, and like they
you
also
and they
talk
won't
about
invite me
like
to their club.
well, they also talked about like cyberpunk was a movement. I'm like, no, that's a genre. Like, are you trying to define a new genre that's happening? Like, maybe they should have just said hope punk or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I also
I-
had that Ched Chiang is an exception to SQUEECORE. I was just
Right.
scrolling
They
down.
had a lot of
Carmen
good
Williams
authors that they
Carter.
like, but
Yeah,
what are
like
you
they
gonna
like
say?
some good people.
But
But
they
they
said,
basically the only specifics they gave were the Goblin Emperor, Chuck Wendig. They
Chuck
hated
Wendig.
they
They
have,
hate
like,
Chuck Wendig.
not
Joss
like Chuck
Whedon.
Wendig. Joss Whedon and his imitators.
and the past Hugo nominees.
And last year's Hugo short fiction, except for the helicopter story. So,
Yeah.
which is like T. Kingfisher, Naomi Kritzer, I wrote them down, Veena Jimin Prasad, John
Naomi
Wiswell,
Kritzer might be hope punk. I've read her YA thriller series, and that's pretty.
Yoonha Lee. Would you consider Yoonha Lee this?
No, not of everything I've read, but I haven't read his middle grade. I've only read their adult stuff.
Yeah,
But I also- okay.
middle grade is.
But
mean,
so I
it's
hate
middle
that the way
grade.
that they frame SQUEECORE and this overarching movement that is inescapable in a way that it invalidates any argument that we made tonight, because they said at the opener that it is the water that surrounds you, that you don't even know that you're in it, that it is so ubiquitous, and also you refuse to name it because it's insidious. So everything that we're saying tonight just confirms their belief that we're so in it that we don't know it, and if we do know it, we're purposely hiding it, insidiously not naming our ideological movement that is SQUEECORE.
Mhm.
Yeah. Tori, did you want to say something earlier? I felt like we got into a cyclone of talking.
You all are good. When we were still on the subject of like different genres and subgenres, the one thing that I think would have been a more meaningful conversation when they were in there, during the podcast, is when they got on the topic of, prose that is more dense, or like purple prose, especially when it comes to diverse authors. I think we tend to struggle with where to put that or where to categorize that, because it doesn't fit the traditional, I guess, like SFF genre. So they mentioned that like extremely briefly, but I think that is a larger conversation that could have been more meaningful if they had gone that route.
Yeah, so many things that like they only touched on. I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
keep going with this.
Yeah.
But then they would go over here, and I'm like,
They went off
now you
on like
lost me.
rant. It ended up being like let's talk about our pet peeves a lot.
Yes. Oh, look, Rachel. who
But like
I've been on
talking
her
about your pet
podcast.
peeves is
If
fine.
you have questions
you're
for
not-
you, Hunley,
Oh my gosh,
There
when
you
am
go.
I getting another book in the Machineries of Empire series? That's my number one question. Can I be there? Oh my god, someone.
Oh my
I just love
goodness.
that series so much.
Yeah.
That series is the opposite of SQUEECORE. It is actually trying to be outside of mainstream. It purposefully makes it so hard for me to recommend it to anyone.
what is the? let me-
Yep, I agree with that. My question
Nine
for
Fox
I've never
Gambit
heard
is
of it.
like the most ridiculously world-built
Oh,
thing.
that
It
book.
is-
I'm intimidated by that.
It's an intimidating book.
Complex Gambit is intense.
Leanna, do not read it, please. Don't hurt me.
Yeah, don't read it.
I have an arc of it that I got a very long time ago that I still haven't read.
Don't do it.
Yes, it's like I mean, I just think I hate the word, but if they're happy books that have, if I had to sum it up, basically books that are hopeful, have a neat ending and may have a younger character or something. But I'm like, but those books have a place. I don't.
Yeah.
I just.
But there again, like if they were arguing that such books exist, we wouldn't have a problem with it. If they were arguing that when those books exist, they don't love them, that's fine. And if they were annoyed that they're popular, that's also fine. But the fact that they make this whole thing as like this is everything and they're authorities on it because they know everything, they've read everything, and everything that there is this. Like that's where we're like, but that's not true.
Yeah.
I think I was also annoyed with this podcast because, like, Raquel, you know, whatever she has or has not done on Twitter, she's Puerto Rican, so she's the person of color on this podcast, and this other person, we don't know a lot about him, but he's a dude, I think.
Or Canadian.
He's Canadian. For some reason, normally in these situations, it's the average dude that gets me riled up in these type of podcasts, but actually, I thought he was very tempered and
it's because he's Canadian.
Because he's Canadian.
I just was like, Raquel, what are you saying? What are we talking about?
Well,
Can
and
I-
kind of
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, my pet one thing that was just a pet peeve is that they kept shitting on the humor that they think is in this nebulous group of books. And it just gets, I guess it's just a general point, but it's like, why can't you just let people like what they like? Like, humor is so subjective. You know what I mean? Like, some things that I think are hilarious, other people think are not. I mean, an entire nation has thought the Big Bang Theory is hilarious for years, which I don't understand, but it's still on, and that's fine. Like, okay, it's not for me. That's okay. I was just like, the humor is definitively subjective. Yeah, there you go.
Humor is so subjective of what people think is funny.
Also, I want it known that I didn't want to engage with SQUEECORE. My Discord told me about it before Jess found out, and I'm like, oh, I'm staying away from that. That looks like people are trying to get a rise out of people and start conversations that don't mean anything. And then Bethany got mad and told Jess, and it's this whole thing.
Sorry.
Which is fun.
They told me about this.
Exactly. There are things that I do not get at all. There's some things that I'm like, I can see why people like that. It's not for me. In both like books, TV, movie, and then some I'm like, I do not understand. But things have their place. And did they mention Ted Lasso? No.
No, they didn't mention Ted Lasso. Otherwise, I would have been upset. More upset. more upset.
Yeah. No, that is because I think she brought that up as like, and then, I mean, that's her identity. You can't take that from her, but it is like, ma'am, this still doesn't like, I don't know, like cement your point or something. Like you can still have some bad takes if you are, Latinx. So.
Well, and when she has her Latinx discussion, I'm like, yes, I agree that we need more Latinx stories in adult SFF. I talk about it all the time. But you know what I do as a white Latinx is I read the Latinx that's currently out. Like I at least do that. Like she has not picked up any of the recent Latinx books, and they're all short. None of them are these huge tomes. They're all like 350 pages.
Well, they're not in horror, and horror is the superior genre.
No, Mexican Gothic's in horror. We got that.
No, it's like,
but there's also like gods of Jade and Shadow. There's there's Orquídea
Divina, The Last Conquista. There's Each of Us a Desert. Like there aren't a lot, but there
that's
are
the weird thing. If horror is the superior genre, why are you talking?
Exactly.
About why don't you just talk about horror?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, and her point the whole time seems to be that it's not gritty enough. And I'm like, if you want gritty books, there are gritty books. Like, I don't know why you're complaining. It's like picking up a middle grade book and complaining that it's not First Law. If you wanted First Law, go read First Law. I don't know why you're looking for it in Percy Jackson.
That's but they do say, because they're like, because we have, been in a global pandemic the past 2 years. So yes, so you understand, even without the pandemic, life is hard. And sometimes people just want to read something cozy or
I wonder if
sometimes I want to read about some blue himbos on a nice planet. Come on, live.
I brought this up sometimes I like reading crime fiction or like watching propaganda, and I was talking about this in a video that I know that's been a thing, and I'm like, but here's the thing, it's a fantasy. I like to watch or read where the police are actually capable,
what they're supposed to be
actually solve a crime. Okay, let me live. I know this is not reality.
Well, also,
but I like watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Okay,
if in fact SQUEECORE is this thing that is everywhere, that is the water that we are swimming in, if that's true, which I mean, I'm not saying that it is, but if it is, it would be an
Never heard of
interesting
those.
moment of history to study in the way that we study film during the Great Depression, and how like movies during that time period very much reflected the situation people were in, and this is what they needed. And it's an interesting, it doesn't mean that like film is over, films used to be good and now they're bad because like people are sad and they need happy and now there's nothing meaningful. No, it's like the way that literature reflects the times like is an interesting microcosm of like that time period to look back on.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. And I mean, like, again, I know I say this a lot, but it's like we are living on a dying planet. We are in the middle of a pandemic. In the US, our political system is just like circling the drain. Like, if people can find something that gives them a little bit of joy, whether it's in the grimdark world, if it's super gritty and that gives you joy, or if it's like some Becky Chamber, like whatever. Let people live. Also, I'm just thrilled when anybody picks up any book. Literally, I mean, unless it's, I don't know, like a Bill O'Reilly history or something.
Oh,
like,
yeah, don't
whatever. Almost any book, I'm going to be just thrilled that you're reading. So, like, let people read. I don't know.
Yes. They had, exactly. There were some good points, but also then they would contradict their good points, or they contradicted themselves a lot. And then mess.
Yeah.
Is Phoenix Extravagant the first book to read from you, Holly?
I wouldn't. It's not my favorite.
That's the one I have.
Well, you can read it. I don't care if you give that a 3 or 2 star. That won't bother me.
So you should start with 9 Fox Gambit?
No, she's not allowed to read my favorite series.
No, I mean in general. Like if someone wants to read
Everyone
Yoon
but
Holly,
me.
where should you start? Not including Leanna.
Well, Yoon Holly, I mean, I don't know what their middle grade is like. So his middle grade,
good. I've read it. It's great.
Oh, okay.
But I think it's very different from 9 Fox Gambit from what I've heard, especially because like if you've ever like, I don't know how to describe it, but they definitely like sort of write fanfic into their own series, if that makes sense. And I like really like that integration of really weird space opera, like otherworldliness, and then also just like not like romance sex scenes, but like weird stuff. I don't know how to describe you and Holly. Like I don't know what to do. They're just like if you just are done with things you've read before, try it out.
Yeah,
but also,
I mean, it is gatekeeping. I think. Or, I don't know. Is it?
Yeah.
But so like, and I don't know who Mara was responding to about hope being meaningful, but this just reminded me of another contradiction where they go in on SQUEECORE being so hopeful and blah, blah, blah. And like, we don't like, that's dumb. But then they're also talking about how there's no earnestness anymore. And like feelings are like, oh, that's not cool. And you shouldn't have feelings. And like, that's what we miss is that there should be sincerity and emotion in books. And I'm like, but you were just pissing on them having sincere hope in SQUEECORE. So like, what?
They want dark, messed up emotions, Leanne.
Yeah.
Only those are meaningful.
Because I wrote, SQUEECORE disallows tragedy and disappointment, the unhappy ending, the rawness, the hopelessness.
Yes. And then on that, the edgelords, perverts, freaks, criminals, and depraved monsters.
But again, they also talk about how great Tolkien was and how we wish it was like that again. And I'm like, Frodo the Edgelord, it was
Frodo the Edgelord. I mean, maybe they're trying to make a point that publishers are gatekeeping and primarily selecting these type of stories, but I think in terms of us as readers, they weren't telling us what to read, I don't think, but they were telling us our tastes were bad if we liked these books.
I got that message loud and clear.
What we should be reading is their work, the people on the podcast.
Well, it seems like too at the end they become
Oh no, I just said it's not. I don't see it as gatekeeping. I just see it as just the whole conversation is pure ignorance. There's nothing. They didn't even list anything to really gatekeep.
Like they knew that they were trying to start stuff, so why hide names? Why not just say what books that they?
I know. I kept waiting for like, okay, tell me exactly who.
Well, it came off as like this sort of like, oh, well, we don't need to name names because we've just told you SQUEECORE is the water you're in. It is everything. Yeah, why name names? It is every single book being published because we've read them all.
All we know is it's Chuck Wendig. Like,
and the Goblin Emperor. It's like Chuck Wendig and the Goblin Emperor and Joss Whedon.
They're so mad.
That's
And like what I thought was weird is like I don't agree that the Poppy War is SQUEECORE, but the Poppy War has a lot of the things in their definition of SQUEECORE, which I got really confused with.
I noticed that the YA, it definitely has like the YA feel Poppy War does, and now it takes like a turn.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, and it's definitely like grittier and darker, but like at the same time,
But we have
like,
nothing
when
to
I
learn
was
from a young
thinking-
protagonist.
Yeah, I think so it seems like towards the end they really got into talking about SFF magazines
Which I don't
and
read.
short fiction published there, which I don't read. I don't think a lot of people do. And they even
No.
say that. They say, like, who mainly reads short sci-fi magazines?
people who
People
write
who
for
write it or want to get published. And that seems to be ultimately mostly of what they're upset about. And I'm like, I don't know who gets published in sci-fi fantasy magazines because I don't read them. And like, I mean, so maybe this is a problem there. But they set it up as like this general thing, and I think we can say it's not a general thing in sci-fi fantasy, but maybe it is in magazines. I don't know.
And I mean, maybe that gets into their whole like hearkening to a glorified past, because there was a time. But mind you, this is in like the 30s and 40s where people really did read those short story magazines a lot.
Mhm.
So maybe that's the bygone
But it's Joss
romanticized
Whedon's
era
fault
they're
that
trying to
nobody
get
is
back
reading
to.
these short stories anymore. They're just watching
Yeah.
Marvel movies.
I guess. I don't know, but
like I said, like even then there are like magazines and there are like publishing houses that are publishing short stories that are not SQUEECORE. I read a lot of short stories, and that's what I'm reading that have come out in the last couple of years. Like, I don't understand. Like, are you like only picking up the collection that gets published every year that's edited by like Veronica Roth or whatever? Like, what are you doing? Even that has a Karen Lord story though, so that makes me excited to read it. Which maybe Karen Lord's their perfect author. She's got a few PhDs, but she's from Barbados, so maybe that makes her less of like the elitist in their eyes. I don't know.
Yeah,
I just want to know what Chuck Wendig did to them personally.
Yeah.
Well, they mentioned, which I mean, they kind of went off on a thing of like how which like fair enough. Back when there was all the scandals happening with like dudes being awful at sci-fi fantasy conventions, he had a lot of friends who did that, who harassed women, and so they kind of are accusing him of having stood by and not done anything until it all got out and then apologized there. And they were kind of made a dig of like, that's how you become a good feminist, is by watching your friends harass women at conventions and do nothing. So I think like yeah.
And maybe I'm not close enough to it, but like, is Chuck Wendig considered to be like the be all end all of like SFF or
I was like, of anything?
I mean, I think he's had a couple of really big bestsellers. He's also really big on Twitter. Like
he is really big on Twitter, but this is part of why
connected.
I wondered if some of what they were actually getting at is Twitter and not actually publishing. It's like, who's popular on Twitter? And I think that and this is just my inference, so I know that they didn't literally say this, but just my inference was, if you're popular on Twitter, that is your gateway to being published and popular. But like, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Like, I think there's been one-offs where that has happened, but I don't necessarily think like, oh, I got big on Twitter and then my career completely took off as a thing.
I have seen some conversations, and I can't say enough to say this is like a trend, but some conversations on people who have gotten big on Twitter, maybe got a deal or like have a decent following and got a book deal, and then are like pushed by their publisher to like be very active on social media. So I don't know if like if that's the thing, because obviously, you know,
I don't know. I think he has a lot of power in the industry because he's been around a lot and his books continue to sell well. I've only read one thing from him, but the thing I read certainly didn't fit any of their definitions of SQUEECORE.
Also, you know who continues to be,
I don't know.
You know who continues to be popular and
I read his latest book, so I don't know.
You know who continues to be popular and published is Stephen King. And like don't think he's SQUEECORE.
He does have young protagonists.
Sometimes.
Might be SQUEECORE then.
But he also has, you know, prepubescent well, I shouldn't even say that, but if you know how it ends, you know what I was gonna say.
Yeah, I haven't even read that book, but I know what
I haven't either.
Everybody knows.
Yes, emo is back. But I mean, I will say that I usually, for like sci-fi and fantasy, when I try to seek out more like grim dark or dark, because that's usually just like what I want in SFF. Like, I'm like, I want there to be terrible things that are worse than my world. That's how I look at it. But some people want this peaceful, I don't know, or Becky Chambers vibes. I just don't get.
I was gonna say, what you just said, Jess, is why I find like grimdark uplifting, because I'm like, oh, by comparison, my life is fantastic compared to this, as opposed to being like, if only life could be like this book.
That's
my
why
life
I
is
would
so
watch
sad.
like really terrible reality TV. I'm like, well, at least I'm not acting a fool on TV like that, but this is great to watch from home. I don't know.
See, I don't love grimdark, but I have realized when I looked at subgenres and stuff, like I love Dying Earth fantasy, because I guess looking at like Earth that's already going through it is different than us getting there.
Yeah.
But like I was looking at a lot of my favorite series, and they're all just like a really bad planet. Like it's not a good time.
I mean, I like both. It depends on what I'm in the
Yeah.
mood. Like, I love Becky Chambers, but like I also like Joe Abercrombie. I mean, like can we not have both?
But
Like,
also,
Yeah.
okay, like
No,
this, I don't know
you
where to bring
cannot.
this up, because I don't know why it was brought up at all on the podcast. But like, I guess in terms of it just ending up feeling like that, them just like randomly venting about things that they just don't like, and so then like they just like SQUEECORE, and then they just start venting about stuff that they don't
Yeah.
like.
Yeah.
And so like at one point she was like, they seem to use, you know, a lot of synonyms instead of the one word that would be the right word. And I was like,
Yeah.
what? You're saying every book that's currently being published uses synonyms instead of the one right word for the what? This is a trend that you're observing? What? Instead of like one book you're thinking of that you're like, that was bad?
I remember that. I do want people to listen to the podcast, and I did have it like when I took notes, I broke it up into their aesthetic, ideology, but and like why, but I feel like it I don't
blends
think it makes that
together.
much
Like,
of a
I feel like
difference.
they don't really follow their own rules. I'm
No.
like, you say you're talking about this thing, but you've been talking about, I don't know. I just
Yeah,
didn't feel
'cause
like
it
it was.
kinda
They said they
actually-
weren't going to talk about ideology, and then they talked about ideology for more than half of the podcast. So
Yeah. So I mean, that was like the biggest part of the thing, but I also feel like they kind of lumped because it's made up, right? Like, do these little the different sections really make a difference? I don't think they. Because I was going through, I'm like, okay, so what really is the difference between the aesthetic and the ideology of SQUEECORE? Like, you're just telling, I don't know. But
But
I
to your
do
point,
have
Danny,
one-
yes, people should 100% like
Yeah,
listen to
they
the
should listen
podcast,
to
and you can
it.
judge for yourself how.
Yeah.
The whole thing had the vibe
Yeah.
of like they're whistleblowers, and I'm just like, on what?
I also will
Yeah.
just say, I've listened to many a podcast. I hate the production on this podcast. Your intro should not be a minute long, and you shouldn't have a minute-long intermission music. Like, no. Like, no. That's not what you need.
Yes. And that's fine, because sometimes I want to suffer. Also, I don't. But yeah, I don't know. It's very odd.
But also, like, I think, wait, were we talking about this? I think we were about like the same idea of like how movies that win Oscars have to be like tragedies and dramatic performances. Like, it can never be
Oh,
like a great
yeah.
comedic performance. And like it's the same vibe as like it's only actually like significant and meaningful art if it's like dark and depressing and makes you want to kill yourself. Like, if it's like a happy story with an excellent comedic performance, or if it's a book and it has like great humor and vibes and people love it, like, well, then that must not be very meaningful. It must not be very good.
It's just
Me still wanting Andrew Garfield to win the Oscar, even though he's leading in a musical. And it's not going to happen because it's a musical. Because musical is not high art. I hate everything. Nothing ever makes me cry more than musicals.
This I
Nothing
love.
else touches my cold heart.
I was gonna say, I mean, I
Yes.
really love
Queen
musicals, and
Alchemist.
I feel like people wouldn't think that about me.
Yeah, Peter Jelly Clark. This is one of the authors I was thinking about of like such a reputation of like Peter Jelly Clark has had a real glow up in the last few years in terms of
yeah.
like his books catching on, and I feel like they're nothing like what they're describing. I don't know,
But
anyway,
he's an academic. He's not working class.
that is true. That is true.
I want to read about
If it's
shitty
not
people
the
in
one,
shitty
it's the
work.
other.
He
And
needs
like,
to
when
quit his
Leanne
job
was
and become a
talking
trucker.
about how they wanted specific books mentioned, I'm like reading a book right now that references like old literature, but it's also 300 years from now, and I'm like, this is pulling me out of the story. Why are we talking about John Keats so freaking much? He has not been alive for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because there was a lot of
true.
like the whole thing of going off about red shirts, which came out. Did I say that while we were on
2013,
live?
2012?
Yeah, I did. Okay, yeah, because like that came out in like 2013, and they were like, it was a couple years ago. I'm like, was it though? I mean, I do think that John Scalzi could fall into the SQUEECORE category. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but he does write more like fun, hopeful sci-fi, which is enjoyable to read. It does feel more like a Marvel movie type thing, but like
Honestly, like the only book that I could think of when I first heard what SQUEECORE was and was like getting an inkling of what they were going for was House in the Cerulean Sea.
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, if that's what you
Oh, I
think,
think
like,
someone
oh, like that
mentioned that
exists,
earlier.
but most books are not House in the Cerulean Sea. Like,
yeah.
it's not a great takeover of the genre.
But that also was like the book I needed at that moment and was great. I don't always reach for fantasy like that, but I was like, oh, this is exactly what I wanted in this moment.
And it's hard to find read-alike titles for it. Like, I don't think that there's a ton of books that I know of that are like it.
No.
I can find them in contemporary literature, but not so much fantasy. Like,
Yeah,
it
no,
reminded me of like A Man Called Ove, which...
Where do you think like Brandon Sanderson would fit in the SQUEECORE?
I was like, that was the other thought I had, was that like
I know,
or like Wheel
I
of
don't know. I
Time.
feel like it has to be SQUEECORE because it's mainstream, but I don't understand either because all of his characters are like in their 20s.
He is definitely, you know, he doesn't write grimdark. He always
he does have more naive protagonists.
Yeah,
I was gonna say all of Song of Ice and Fire is about children protagonists, so like that's SQUEECORE.
Yeah, of course. But Brandon Sanderson always is like, because there's usually like a religious theme and like something working towards something hopeful. So I guess Brandy Sandy.
I'm trying to think of the themes of capitalism, but they're mostly about like imperialism and empire and why they're bad but necessary evils during times of war. They're weird themes.
I mean, he could fit into some of their SQUEECORE stuff. He'll have like naive characters who haven't gone through a lot sometimes, and
they're young, but you know, Kaladin
is can be some of them are damaged.
Well, no, damage is okay because remember they're allowed to have a traumatic past, and that's like their defining characteristic. Is
I'm not like other girls. I have a
I think in Stormlight specifically is his only series with like I guess what they would deem a character who's lived through things with Dalinar. The rest are all like late teens, early 20s, which I guess means you haven't lived a life. Newsflash.
We just learned
the life you've lived. Invalid.
David Copperfield is SQUEECORE.
Never. Men don't write YA. What are you talking about?
David Copperfield's SQUEECORE. Catcher in the Rye is SQUEECORE.
Oh God.
What about Great Expectations?
No, because it has emotions. I feel like they would be into Catcher in the Rye, honestly.
Well, but he has trauma, and you're not allowed to have trauma.
But they have dark emotions.
He goes to his
dark
therapist.
emotions. It's okay.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
I don't know. They also would mention things like there was a moment too where they went off on like how ridiculous it was for people to be writing stuff subverting Lovecraft, being like, I defeated Lovecraft, he's dead, yay for me. And I was like, who are they talking about? I was like, because like N.K. Jemisin has done some subversive things, Victor Lavelle, but then I was like, maybe they mean Matt Ruff because they had Lovecraft County that became an HBO show. Are they mad about that?
Maybe.
Like maybe that's what they're upset about.
So again, when they were going on about how all these people, their only point of reference is film and television, I think they were just projecting the fact that their only point of reference is film and television because like they talked about Ghostbusters, they talked about so much Joss Whedon, they talked about
I wondered if they were
they talked about
giving them the benefit of the doubt. I was wondering if they were referencing those because they didn't want to talk about titles of books.
That's possible.
That was kind of what I thought maybe they were going for. I'm trying to be charitable.
It's the whole purpose of the episode. Like, why are we just talking in generalizations and all these broad statements?
Plausible deniability. You can't say they're wrong about it if they didn't actually mention a book.
Like,
we're sitting here like, spill the tea.
Just tell us what you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah. Write down examples, be specific. I think even
I mean, like, what's the point of even bringing up any books? Because it's everywhere. Like, where to even begin?
You already know what I'm talking about.
I was like, well, y'all are here.
Everyone's subverting everything. I'm like, that's not true. We have every year we just have cookie cutter books. Wasn't that what we were just talking about? That nothing's new?
Also, when you think about the like properties that are getting adapted, we've got Wheel of Time, we've got Witcher, we've got Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings. Like, what do you? I mean, like the biggest to the mainstream bit, like the biggest ones are all conventional. Like none of them are, I think, would fall into this SQUEECORE definition.
I feel like Lovecraft.
You don't think Witcher is SQUEECORE?
With love, I think people talk
I
about
squee
Lovecraft
when I see
a lot
what's his face
because
on the screen, but
he was instrumental in the genre, but he also was a really terrible racist. And people like want to take these things
Yeah.
and put their own spin on it that's not by a racist. I think that's why I
Well,
love
I think
Yeah.
also, I don't know, some people might not agree with me, but even removing the author's history and problematic tones, I think his ideas are cool, but I hate how he writes. So there might just be some people who are like, this is really cool stuff, but I want to write it in a more modern style as well.
It's also, I mean,
But
it's
they don't like that.
undeniable.
Yeah, they
It's
don't like that,
undeniable
and they don't give
people-
space for these authors to take those racist tropes and those old tropes and subvert them and try to write history through them.
But it's also, they presume an attitude of the person who's taking a Lovecraftian idea and playing with it. And they're saying, oh, so that what this person, they've decided, what they thought was like, I'm going to defeat this racist by writing a Lovecraftian thing and I beat you with my book. And I'm like, or Lovecraft had an effect on the genre, and taking a Lovecraftian idea is a thing that authors might do because you are always like building on the backs of your predecessors. People take ideas from Dune and from the Book of the New Sun and from Lovecraft, and then they build something that either subverts that or comments upon it or is like unbeknownst to them inspired by it because like you pick it up by osmosis. Like that's like this like, it's again always attributing these insidious motives to like why people are writing what they're writing and like why people are reading what they're reading. And I'm like, it's just like, it's not that deep or dark. Like people are just like writing stories they feel called to tell. They're not like trying to personally attack you and what you want to see published by writing this.
Well, it's very similar to like how in romance, people grew up reading these like super problematic romances. So now they're going back and like trying to do those tropes again, but like with a more, modern take on it that's not as like, problematic and rapey.
Yeah.
So I mean, like it's the same thing of like, hey, there's something here that I really like. Maybe I really like an alpha hero. Is there a way for me to write this in a way that doesn't like make every feminist bone in my body cry?
Right.
Let's try it. Like, I think it's the same impulse, right?
Well, and I've seen authors' notes too, where exactly that, especially like some of the Black authors who've written things like that, talking about reading Lovecraft as a kid and being really into it, but then being upset about like, and so I get it, like the impulse of like, look, this was a thing I loved, but also there's some messed up stuff here. Like, I want to do something fresh with it. And I don't think there's any, I mean, they clearly don't like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Well, it's also just like, I think, and we've all kind of talked about this in the book community. Like when things come into public domain, it's like you can have a lot of fun. Like right now we have The Great Gatsby, and now we're getting all of those spin-offs, and it's not necessarily for any. Like with Lovecraft, it definitely is like taking a thing and maybe giving your own voice to it. But with Great Gatsby, I mean, we do have The Chosen and the Beautiful, which did add more diversity into it, right? That's the title.
I don't think anyone is like trying to stick it to Jane Austen and look at how many books we've had that are like riffs on Pride and Prejudice.
And I mean, I would take one every day of every year. Like I could read nothing but Jane Eyre.
I'm ready.
So yeah,
now is Jane Austen SQUEECORE?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Jane Austen adaptations seem to be, right?
Adaptations maybe, but like, was Jane Austen? No.
She was very cynical.
Yeah. And she talked a lot about like class differences, and I don't know. It's interesting.
So neoliberal.
But she was elite. She was elite.
Good point.
So. Yeah, it just.
I mean, it's always happened, right? And the number of retellings or inspired things by Shakespeare, for instance, like going back farther, like I just think this is part of how art gets made.
And this is where, again, they contradict themselves, because in this podcast, they both say that they want everything they read to be referencing old literature and being a conversation with old literature, but also, why can't things just be new ideas and completely new and completely never seen before? And why are you having to reference and redo things that came before? Why can't you just do your own thing? Well, we want you to reference what came before. We want you to acknowledge other texts from before, but also don't, because you need to be your own thing. And I'm like, which one is right?
I don't think they're arguing with a dead man. I think it's like Leanna said, like I forgot, sorry, that was Angela. The themes, but it's just like saying like people don't bring up Tolkien every time they talk about fantasy. Like there are people who are important pillars or influencers in the genre. So I don't feel like they're arguing with a dead man when they bring up, and it's not like, I don't think it's always like brought up. It's just like used usually as like a talking point, or here is the themes in this book that you may like because it's playing on Lovecraft So I don't
I mean,
know.
I do think some books do it. Like The City We Became does that.
Oh,
The
well,
City We Became is
yeah.
very like, screw you, Lovecraft.
Yeah, I mean,
Which is what I
So,
assumed.
as
they
we
were.
established, they hate N.K. Jemisin on this podcast.
Yeah.
and so they don't mention her, even though she's like totally the opposite of most of what they say they don't like.
But they're
Well,
clearly referencing her, I think, at several points, which
Yeah.
is interesting because I think she's
Interesting.
the antithesis of what they're trying to say.
I
but-
agree.
Well, Jess and I have talked about The City We Became, and I do think a lot of their definition does fit The City We Became for some parts of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
could-
except for the
but not
fact that there's Bronca, but
Yeah.
you don't like Bronca, Jess.
but like not the rest of her work though. It's like
No.
one of
Also,
her books.
Yeah,
Like
I
that
would
one of her
describe
books.
Well, also, I would not describe this, even though I can see some of the elements there, I wouldn't describe The City We Became as a comfort read.
no.
It was
Right?
for me,
Like, I don't
but-
think it's cozy.
No.
I mean, yeah, I guess for Angela.
I
Yeah,
literally
for
read
someone.
it when it was published, which was April 2020. I was very comforted. I was
Oh
Well,
my
I mean,
God.
Leanna's comfort read is First Law, so like, there's no accounting for comfort reading.
Are we?
I almost
only
all
read
the times-
magazines.
I was gonna say all the times in the podcast when they wanted to read about an old, grizzled, problematic, like angry, lived life person. I was like, you just want to read First Law. Just go read First Law, and you'll just love your life so
remember,
much.
he does like grim dark, but he didn't want to talk about it on the podcast. That wasn't the
Yeah.
scope
Right.
of the podcast.
What is the scope? I would like to know.
It was everything.
The
but
scope
also
was
nothing.
everything being published in SFF, but Grimdark is SFF,
Yeah.
but not that.
I think this is right. Like, I think this could have been interesting, but it was so vague and broad and like not clearly. I don't know.
Well, like they had a lot of terms that they were defining. Like they spent a good time like trying to define it,
Mhm.
but it ultimately amounts to like a vibe. And it's hard to really have
You
a
know it when you
meaningful-
see it, and believe us, we see it.
Yeah. SQUEECORE is like porn.
And like maybe I'm just not thinking enough, but like I read a lot of adult SFF every year. Like I read like 36 of the new releases last year and like 30 of the year before that. And it's like I don't have like an encompassing theme or vibe to encapsulate these 60 books I've read. Like they're
Yeah.
all very different.
Yeah,
Books that appeal to you. It's Angela Core.
Yeah, well, yeah, or like maybe the biggest thing, and this is why maybe I had such a visceral reaction, is the only thing that connects them is more diverse books are being published. That's like
Yeah.
the big connector. And if we're against that, I just like cringe and get
No, but
angry.
they said that they're for it. That's a net positive, but it's
In
not
theory.
enough. It's not like the good
only
old
one
days.
is a little life.
Oh, I don't like
God.
a little life.
Misery.
Okay,
No,
I read
man,
Two
no.
Paradise, and like if A Little Life is anything like that, it ain't.
I heard
for
it's
me.
worse. Like very just you cry the entire
It's torture
800
porn.
pages.
No,
And
thank
I'm-
you.
Yeah, no, I haven't read either. I don't plan to, but I liked watching everyone's reviews to Paradise. That was fun.
Okay, Angela, just as a side note, has such a cool video concept she did, which was summing
Yes.
up
This was awesome.
hype on new releases. I don't think I've ever seen someone do that, and I thought that was such a cool idea.
Yeah,
Everyone
I
go
like
watch that video. I mean,
I
I'm
was
so
making the new
selfishly she
releases
included
content I wanted in the world because
Yeah,
I'm bad at
yeah.
listening to synopses. Whenever people do that, I'm like, I'm such a bad listener. I don't know what this book's about anymore.
It was so great, like synthesizing people's reviews of recent releases. I thought that was
Yeah.
a cool
Yeah,
idea.
I
It was
thought that
also
a cool
great for
idea.
me finding new channels because, like, people always say standalone reviews never do good, but I was like, that search bar was my friend.
Yes. Yes,
good
it
one.
was. Yeah.
It is.
was.
It is. I
It
agree.
is.
I mean, they meant for us to do this. This is what they wanted, so they can't be mad at it. This is literally
Unlike
what they
that
wanted.
article she wrote, we talked about the thing that she said.
Look, she was upset other people didn't want to talk about it. We talked about it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was useful. Like even defining if it exists, I don't even know what you do. Other than read the books you want to read.
I hadn't heard Squee. in
Yeah, I don't
a
think
long
people use it that
time.
much. Maybe in fan fiction, maybe. I don't
Yeah, it's
know.
a fan fiction thing, which again gets into the like. I mean, this wasn't overt. I want to be very clear. This was not overt, but there did feel to me to be somewhat misogynistic undertones to this. Of like, Squee is traditionally a fan fiction thing, which is traditionally very like the kinds of fan fiction that has Squee is dominated by women, and like
Mhm.
I don't know.
Well, when she talked about her own article and how it wasn't being discussed, she literally said, you would think that they would be interested because God knows they write enough slash fiction. And I was like, who is they? And what are you talking about? And what is going on right now?
Also, like, who interviews people about books? Like, we pretend like books are important because we love them, but books are like the lowest form of media in terms of like what gets attention and clicks. Like,
I mean,
What are you talking about? People are getting into SFF because they're trying to become millionaires. That was
like when
apparently
they
this
said
is
that,
the
I'm
new
like, you
thing.
mean like how people say don't try to make money from BookTube? That doesn't mean I don't want my like $5 a video. Like, I still want it.
This
Yes,
reminds
they're
me
like,
of
you're just doing this for views. Yes, I
Yes,
want people to view
of
the video.
course.
library.
Yes.
That's exactly correct.
This reminds me of an interview with the lead singer of the Decemberists. I don't know if anyone listens to the Decemberists, but it was like, on like Fresh Air on NPR, and asking him like, if back when he was starting out, like if he wasn't going to be a singer-songwriter, like what was he going to be? And he was like laughing about how, his backup plan in case he couldn't make singing and songwriting work out was to be a writer, which is like such a great backup plan under fire.
Exactly.
Maya, your comment is so funny because like I do the exact opposite of what people are supposed to do on BookTube to become
I know.
Popular.
I should pretend
I-
like I'm reading Brandon Sanderson for the first
I just
time.
love this.
That's what I'm
I'm
supposed
I
to
know.
do.
I squeeze.
Matt, I'm glad that there's a man out there who's willing to squeeze.
Yes.
Love it.
That's a real man. You
That's
need to
right.
start an
Great
alpha
person.
podcast.
That's like a good
Yes.
like shirt, a mug.
Yeah.
Matt's putting in all the work in our buddy read of Fall of Hyperion right now. Like actually being like, I looked up this person's name. It's this literary reference. I'm like, thank you, because I didn't do that work and I don't know why this is here.
That's me with Leanna when it comes to the lore in Realm of the Elderlings. We're reading that right now, and I'm like, okay, if I have any really big questions about what the fuck is happening, Leanna will be able to straighten it out for me.
I was trying to figure out if Hobb would be SQUEECORE, if they would approve of it because of all the suffering.
There's no
There is a
one
lot of
person with
suffering.
Hobbs
There's even
SQUEECORE.
animal death in Hobbs, so
Yeah.
I mean, that's true suffering.
It's true.
I mean, I think Sarah J. Maas is SQUEECORE. I have to assume.
Definitely.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yeah.
I
By
mean,
the
if you're
way,
gonna have a book where people are
congratulations.
fucking in the air, then that feels like.
But you
SQUEECORE
know
to me.
what? She has emotions, guys.
No, I fist
Yeah,
pump. I
unironic,
squeeze.
un-Joss Whedon-y emotions. They should love it.
Yeah,
Hyperion. Oh, Fitz is young.
he is, but he does
But Life
age.
Ship Traders has older characters, so Life Ship
Okay.
Traders isn't SQUEECORE.
It's true. They've lived a life, but it also has a lot of young protagonists. I mean, I don't know.
But so does Song of Ice and Fire.
Life Ship Traders has like such a wide range of ages and life experiences and emotion. I don't want this.
It's
This is my thing. It's like I hate the term SQUEECORE. I can't think of it as positive.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's not. But there's elements of the squee in all like popular sci-fi and fantasy. So
I do prefer hope punk as a term because I feel like hope punk encompasses a lot of what they're talking about.
I haven't read it, but is there any squee in the Greenbone saga?
I don't even know what that is.
I mean, there's maybe like
No.
one younger character, but there's not
So
much.
this might be the
squee.
one. It's
Mm-mm.
diverse and it's not
destruction.
squee. So
Like, yeah, and you see them, it covers 25 years. So if they
Yeah.
hadn't lived a life when you started, they've lived a life by the end.
Wait, what's it? Give me some individual titles in this
Jade
series.
City.
Jade
Oh,
City, Jade
yeah.
War, Jade
Okay,
City.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've got that. I'm gonna hopefully I'll read that next month.
I have 2 copies of it now.
Oh wait, Leanna, you haven't read Jade City?
No, I wanted to, or I'm
I
going
think she
to.
might like that one. We'll
I'm gonna
find
read
out.
it next month, Lana, if you want a buddy read.
I don't know, Angela.
Yeah.
We shouldn't
Let's
say
do
it
it.
just yet.
Listen, I actually think she might like it, and I won't be upset if she doesn't, because
Really?
a lot of people don't like it for particular reasons, and I don't think those will be Leanna's
Well, it
reasons.
seems like the kind of thing I would like because I like gangsters and criminals and
You might
Yeah.
be into it.
I
think she'll
don't.
like it.
Yeah. Like I feel like
Yeah.
I'm the odd person out who didn't like it. I mean, I didn't dislike it, but I didn't.
I'm trying to think. There's a
Elle
couple
didn't
people
like
who
it.
didn't. Yeah.
Most people, well,
I
a
didn't
lot
like
of the
it that
people,
much. It was.
I knew
I mean,
didn't
I
like
see.
it.
I get why people like it. It just wasn't my thing.
Do not touch the. Oh, hopeful. We're hopeful.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
We'll all log into YouTube tomorrow and see Leanna's rant review of Jade City.
Oh,
the fact that you think
Not
that I
be
can read
walking.
Jade City tonight and film a review for it all in one night.
We log on. She's got a 45-minute review. It's like here's every piece of
Everything.
inconsistent world building.
Okay,
in-
but, spoilers for next month because Hillary and I are doing a TBR swap, and she like wrote. She did like like blind date with a book type thing where she wrapped them all in brown paper and wrote on it. And one of them, she was like, "There's a 95% chance you won't like this, but it's my TBR, so I get to pick this for you. And if you guess who the author is, I will tell you if you're correct."
Is it fantasy, sci-fi?
Fantasy.
Sanderson?
Oh, okay.
Oh. Yeah. Great.
I thought that was too. I thought you've
You're
already.
so easy, Leanna.
What is
You're
it,
so
Warbreaker?
Yeah, I don't see that going well.
Yeah,
I don't
have
see
you
that
just-
going well. That has the humor you don't like from Sanderson in there. I don't see that going well.
No.
No, I haven't. I'm planning on starting it this weekend. I don't know.
Well, if you wait long enough, Jess, maybe me and Mara will catch up and we'll be your emotional support through Jade.
My friend, like, I read them in, I don't know what, September, and then my friend started reading it in like November, and so now she's just waiting on Jade Legacy. I'm like, hey, buddy, read. I read the first page and I saw who was on, and I said, absolutely not Fonda.
Your best friend.
You knew what was going to happen. We
Yeah, you knew that was
predicted
gonna
that.
happen, Jess.
But
I also
DNF'd
DNF'd
I didn't know it was
Warbreaker, Heather.
confirmed. Ooh.
I DNF'd it, and then I had Sanderson fans.
But also
trying
what
to convince me
what Evie is
months that I
saying
should read
about
it.
how core is a weird thing to name it, since core is more about aesthetics than about like which like it's
It's
I
about
think that's
vibes.
another. But I think that's another way that they are belittling it, because they're basically saying it's not even literature anymore. It's just a vibe.
Right.
And like, I hate
love
labels that
vibes.
aren't useful, and I just don't think this label's useful. Even if you were like, I want to avoid SQUEECORE. Like, I actually hate what SQUEECORE is. I don't think the label's useful. Like,
Or if you wanted to seek it out.
yeah, or want to find it. Like, I sometimes don't like how YA is used, but like, it's at least something where people kind of get the vibe of it, and it can be a starting point. Like, some labels are necessary evils, and not everything fits into boxes.
Grimdark is helpful if you don't want to read triggering content. Like, probably avoid Grimdark.
Yeah.
But like,
with the YA, I think Alexa, are you still here? Because
I don't know, but like,
it's a YA video.
when Bethany was mentioning like hope punk, it's like, I think that's useful. I think if you say something is hope punk, you know about what that is, and it's like, that is or isn't my vibe right now.
Yes. Yeah, I do think hope punk is a better way to go. Like, it doesn't encompass everything they're talking about, but I feel like it's the vibe of kind of what they mean, and it's a more useful word for it.
Hi Alexa.
Reporting for duty, Alexa.
So talking about YA, and I'm assigning this to you, your channel. Can you invite me, please? So let's talk about, we can talk about the details. Please and thank you.
Yeah, let me know. I'm
You can tell
there,
it's almost
Alexa.
5 a.m. over there.
It's only 4:53. Okay.
Well, Alexa
Dark
wanted me to
twisted
host something with you and she. I'm trying to remember. I'll have to go look through my DMs. So we can just do we can trade off.
You guys still have to do that thriller collab video we talked about New Year's Eve, because I want to watch that and like figure out what books to read.
Yeah.
I don't even remember that.
It was
What
when
was
I was
that?
like,
Yes,
I've never read
Alexa's on
thrillers.
TikTok now. That's right.
She is on TikTok.
Ooh, skew.
Yeah.
No, we're meaning
Welcome
like
to
a
the dark
live
side.
stream, not a video.
Yeah.
Yeah, live stream. So that way you don't have to plan it. We can just.
Well,
Man,
and
Mary.
Alexa and I were like loosely talking about Mara dragging you into doing a read and discussion of The Maidens, because me and Alexa disagree so much on it.
Oh, that's right. I'm gonna read it. So I mean, yeah, I could do that.
Oh, yes. Well, on the topic of SQUEECORE, I know y'all have notes. Were there any final thoughts or
Let me see.
Oh,
if we
let me
can
look. I
resolve
have
it.
like 5.5 pages of notes on this thing.
I know we were sending voice notes in our group chat, and I could hear Bethany's page
Like turning my pages.
Okay, when I listen to this podcast on my day off. That's how committed I was to this effort. And I literally sent them a picture of my face while I was listening to it, because I was so confused about how like inconsistent
like-
the argument was.
I think the only thing I haven't brought up was the whole I want to talk to the manager thing. I just really didn't like that they brought that up. I was just like, what?
Yeah.
And they said it feels like HR. I don't know whose HR they're
Yeah.
encounter. I would love it if my HR sounded like I don't know, Becky Chambers. That'd be
I
great.
think what they were trying to say is that like it has to pass HR muster of being like completely politically correct, and you can't have anything gray, you can't have anything ambiguous, you can't have
Leanna,
anything.
you
that's,
are
like,
HR, so
questionable.
you can just start vetting all of our fantasy picks for us.
Yeah, because I mean, first law. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally HR approved.
I think, like, I just thought it was interesting that sometimes they said the thing that was exactly right, but like glossed over it. That like because they talked about, well, we do know we've been in a global pandemic, and there are people yearning for safety in a world that feels unsafe and unstable. And I was like,
Yeah.
Exactly.
exactly. Like, what? Why is that bad?
But also, experiencing all of the emotions on the spectrum is healthy. Like happiness to sad, like that's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I think they were talking about I want to talk to the manager of physics or something. Like I was just like, what are you reading? Like goodness.
Who do you think the manager of sci-fi fantasy is?
Chuck Wendig.
According to them, George
Apparently.
Martin. Like
According to them.
Oh my God, this we are all Debras.
Listen.
I almost wore that my favorite hoodie.
I was rewatching your CommuniTEA video about this, and I forgot you were wearing that, and I was like, that makes me so happy to see.
So people are always like, where is this? I'm scouring, and I'm like, well, let me just link it to you. I just want to be. See, sometimes we want to be sad.
well, luckily I can give you lots of recommendations for that, but I also have happy books.
Yeah. So my final takeaway is, I mean, I feel like we've just said this. I don't think it was helpful. It felt really hateration and holleration in this dancery, and I do not appreciate it.
It felt a little bit like we were listening in on like a private vent session between two people who were just like bitching about things they hate, and I'm like, oh, should I be listening? Like, I feel like
It kind of did. It kind of did. Yeah.
They said the quiet part out loud a lot in that podcast.
Yeah, they were edging us the whole podcast.
Oh yeah.
But read what you like, and
Life is so short. If you find enjoyment from a book of almost any kind, I'm very happy for you.
Yeah.
as long as it's not SQUEECORE.
It felt
No.
like browsing
as
Reddit.
long as it's not written by Candace Owens or somebody. I mean, actually, you can read what you want. Just don't talk to me.
Yeah.
Listen,
Okay.
if you put Mary J, I mean, come on.
Aunt Mary invented thigh-high boots, so please.
We've had 3 kitty cat sightings. I just have to say I see a tail, and it makes me excited.
Oh,
That's my
Oh,
baby.
She's a calico.
well, Danny, I appreciate all of your comments though, because it's always it makes for a good discussion when there are, difference of opinions. So
Yeah.
I know.
recommend
Danny's
people
always
to
my
listen to it.
my devil's advocate, which I appreciate because it makes me think about things differently, which is good.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm not going to pretend like I listened to this podcast wanting to be swayed. I was angry at the premise when I read a blog post. I was. It would have taken a lot.
Yeah.
Also, no, they did not say George R.R. Martin is Squee. I think he's one of the few people they like who's mainstream.
Yeah.
Well, they also
really don't
complained.
like how-
They brought up George R.R. Martin in the moment where they're talking about how people think they can make money now from SFF because you've got people like George R.R. Martin who are aspirational figures, and it was still like, not that he's Squee, but they were still kind of like, it was like a weird put down. They also brought him up when he said R.F. Kuang's name. He's like, I hope I said that correct. If I didn't, don't yell at me like George R.R. Martin. Like, they kept bringing him up at like weird times.
Yeah.
It's because I think it goes back to the clickiness of the Hugo Awards from when George Martin hosted and how much backlash that got. And I think they were on the side of those people being too harsh. Like, I think that's the in between the lines context.
I think they made a comment at some point of like, yeah, if you saying somebody's name right, like that'll end racism or something. It was something to that effect. And it was like, okay, I get that you're being exaggerating, and I get kind of what you're going for, but like literally if you're the host of an award show, like that's the literal actual minimum you can do is make sure you know how
honestly,
to
And
say
they almost
name.
like always ask you to write it phonetically on a piece of paper. It's not like you're unprepared as the person. Like,
yeah.
The podcast is just go to your wherever you listen to podcasts and type in guide to SQUEECORE. I'm pretty sure it's the only thing.
yeah,
that
it's
would
right
just
good, but not spelled correctly because it's a pun.
Yeah, they're so edgy.
Is it even a pun?
Good
Because
humor.
GUD isn't a word, so it's not
Yeah.
a pun.
Well,
It's
like,
just
It's
wrong.
not a pun. It's right. It's like
But I thought
it's a
I like
joke.
the
It's supposed
artwork.
to be a joke. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the artwork. For
Well,
the
of course, the most
podcast.
dangerous woman in fiction would have a tattoo-looking logo.
I did not like her music choices, or at least how long they
Mm-mm.
went, but I did like the artwork for the podcast. I thought it was cute.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's the
Part of me like
positive.
wanted to read one of her short stories before this, but I also just couldn't be bothered to give her 30 more minutes of my time because I wanted to know if like her work was accidentally SQUEECORE, but she didn't know it.
Wouldn't that be priceless?
It may aggravate you, but I'm just
May.
saying, like, if this was obviously a lot of our opinions, I mean, a lot of it was facts stated from the podcast, but
I
if you
don't-
just
you-
want to hear it on your own.
Yeah, you could listen to it and see.
Also,
if,
I don't know what Get Good is. People are saying it's planned that. I don't know what that is.
That's like
I
a
don't
gamer
know.
thing
Oh.
of like,
Okay.
just get good.
Oh yeah, she went off on a big rant about how they hate that books have like geeks and nerds portrayed as like ostracized. And they're like,
that I
it's so
agree with.
mainstream. Everybody, even the dude bros, play video games, and she was like really upset about this.
Yeah.
Can I say that I actually agreed with that point? I was like, it
Yeah.
is a tired trope at this point to be like the nerds are being picked on because
Yeah.
they play video games. I'm like,
I
Yeah,
guess
agree.
I just don't see it very often, though.
Yeah, I
Well,
don't
again,
read it in
it
my
reminded me of
fiction,
Ready
so.
Player One, and I was like, that has literally been out for a decade. So
Yeah.
Yeah, like I haven't seen it because yeah, it's very normalized now. Like Henry Cavill has a 5-minute video where he's building a computer and like it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
we understand that geek culture is not. Yeah, it's not 16 Candles or whatever that movie is anymore. Like, we're not
Right.
there.
yeah,
I mean, like Avengers
Yeah.
Campus in Disneyland parks is like an entire like shrine to nerddom. That is the
Yeah.
most mainstream place that
Yeah.
it can be.
Yeah, I guess
Also-
I guess I just don't think I see a lot of authors doing that. I've seen it a couple times in romances from older authors,
yeah.
but like not often. Like not many people are doing that.
Not in
Sorry.
mainstream SFF books that are winning Hugo Awards, which is what they're upset about.
Yeah, Marvel fans who think they are oppressed, Eric. Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
Nobody
confirm-
likes Marvel.
Nobody. Marvel's not
Nobody.
popular.
Yeah, no.
So obscure.
Never heard of it.
Side note, I was listening to a economics podcast, and they were talking about how a small change that Disney made to its the way you book tickets and stuff has led to a 40% increase in revenue this year. So
Well, is it
Wow.
to do with the genie system where you have to pay
Yes.
for rides in addition
yes,
to
anybody who
paying
saw
for
that
entry?
2-hour documentary from Defunctland, it's because of that change.
Wait, what? You have to pay?
So, you know, like
for-
back in the day at Disney, like you had to pay for individual rides, but the entry to the park was a lot cheaper. So now the entry to the park is just as expensive, and it has always been, in fact, more so. But in addition to that, you have like the genie system where in order to get on a ride, like the fast pass kind of thing, you have to pay for it in addition to your entry to the park.
Yeah, no.
Excuse me?
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you
it
can,
used to
I mean,
be-
you can wait to get on rides and still get on, but if you want to get on faster.
Yes.
But also for rides
but
that are
it's-
like newer, like the Rise of the Resistance, like
Yes,
there's just
you
like you're going to be
have
there
to.
all day, or you
Well,
literally
or-
have to.
you literally have to. Bethany, you would enjoy this video. I'll
Okay.
send you the link. It's
Okay.
very good, but it's also
Sounds
very
interesting.
geeky. But anyway, all that to say, Disney, if Disney is like obscure nerd culture, considering that in the middle of a pandemic they're up 40% in their revenue, like I think
Disney prices, like I've been to Disney
It's
twice.
expensive.
Me personally, again, I don't see the allure of going to Disney frequently.
I
Me
don't either.
personally. But I know the prices. I mean, so wait, you can't just never. I don't even, I'm not going, but that just sounds ridiculous because Disney is
Well,
I
already.
have to say the
like-
best experience going to Disney in a long time for me was last summer because it was before Genie was introduced, but they had gotten rid of fast passes, which meant that all standby queues were much shorter and faster. And there was no fast pass, there was no extra fees, there was less people because it was the pandemic. It was the best time at Disneyland I've ever had because standby queues were like 20 minutes, the entire park, no fast pass. I was like, this is great.
this isn't. Yeah, well, I think that the optimal situation is if you can go casually, if you like live next to Disney World or Disneyland, but not very many people do. Like, for instance,
Yeah.
in Knoxville, it's very common for you to have a season pass to Dollywood, and then it's a great time because you can just go for, you know,
But
a
of
few
course,
hours.
not
and
to
have
like
fun.
entirely derail this conversation, but like that's a big problem where like people who do live near Disney parks and then they know about releases and they know about merch and they know about the lines for things. So then people who do travel in from a long distance away, they don't even get to do things or buy things or access things because the locals who are obsessed and go every single day, they go and they know where to stand and they know what to do, and like only they get these things, and people from out of town who this is their only time to be there don't actually get to do the thing or buy the thing.
That's a big point. Like that's part of the conclusion of this doc. I'll link to this little film from Defunctland. It's very interesting. It's about the history of how they've done queuing over the lifetime, and it's basically logistics principles but made interesting because it's, you know, Disney.
Cool.
Anyway,
I can say go to Cedar Point. It's in Ohio. It'll be cheaper.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's true.
Yes, I agree with this. If there is SQUEECORE, it is Disney adults.
SQUEECORE. We can agree.
I'm okay with that. I still love Disney.
I do too, but I feel like my appreciation of Disney now as an adult, I mean, I do enjoy the park, but I think my appreciation for how much thought goes into everything they do, including, I mean, the profitability of it, like that's one aspect of it, but like the way they make sure that you're entirely immersed in the experience, the way they make sure there's always a trash can 20 paces every single time, the way that they make sure that like all these little things, these attention to detail is like, it's insane, like how much attention to detail there is.
Yeah.
Cedar Point's only gimmick is big roller coasters. It's great. And it's in Sandusky, Ohio. So a hotel is only like $100 a night.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Cedar Point is great.
Yes.
Yeah. Tori, what's your favorite ride?
I just put the link in the private chat because I don't think
Millennium
used it publicly.
Yes, that's my favorite too. Even 22 years old, Millennium. It's so good.
It's good. I still haven't been on Top Thrill Dragster.
That one's okay, but only wait 20 minutes for it. Don't wait like a longer than 20 minutes. I'm not a local for Cedar Point, but I usually go once a year. It's fun.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
Well, because my family lives like an hour and a half away from it.
Oh, nice.
Jess, did you want to go to bed?
Yeah, I was gonna say I've got to go to bed even if Jeff doesn't. So.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Side note: I was out walking Nigel, and then there were these little Girl Scouts, and they conned me into buying cookies. And this is the first time I tried the lemon, and I'm like, what? So I'm about to go eat a lemon Girl Scout cookie.
Are they as good as
Are you cheating on lemon Oreos?
I know.
No, they're not as good. I was trying to support the little entrepreneurs, okay? They are not as good, but they are a good lemon cookie. So,
okay,
Heather, be quiet. Hating ass. Anytime I talk about lemon Oreos, she come.
They're so good.
Feeling.
I bought an entire pack of the thin lemon Oreos the other day because I had a terrible day at work, and I thought, what would Jess do?
We just
She'd buy these lemon Oreos
also, and they are good. Yeah,
they're really good.
Our Girl Scouts wait outside of the tea, so people come home from their commutes, and then there are the Girl Scouts with cookies for $5, and you just take out your money.
The Girl Scouts were set up at McKay's last weekend, and it was like peak busy time, and you were standing in this long ass line, and it was like, yeah, you're
like, oh yeah, I need lemon. I need cookies.
This is smart. Yeah.
Wonderful. But I mean, is it alive if I don't talk about lemon Oreos?
Lemon
Oreos are to Jess what First Law is to
Leanna. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah.
But to Leanna's credit, Bethany brought up Joe Abercrombie, and it was like an hour and 15 into the live. So
there you go.
I do think I did sneak in a mention that no one noticed before that.
Oh.
I just let it go.
Oh,
rewatch.
A lot of Thin Mint love, of course.
I love Thin Mints. They're so good, especially frozen.
I don't like chocolate and mint together, really.
Me?
That's fine. More for me. It's fine.
Yeah,
I don't really like cookies.
My favorite are the peanut butter ones, though.
Oh, tagalongs. Well, they have a different name now, but they're like peanut butter patty now.
They're tagalongs here still.
Yeah, here they are too. Tagalongs. They have another. They also have another peanut butter one that's like a peanut butter Oreo. Yeah, those I don't like as much, but the tagalongs are great.
Yeah, tagalongs and Thin Mints are what I grew up on.
And then is it the Samoas? Is that
Samoas?
Samoa's my mom's favorite.
My mom too.
No, I don't like
moms just like Samoas.
Yeah, I feel like it's very mom.
My life would be so much more dangerous, or not dangerous, but like I would be spending more money at the grocery store than I should if Thin Mints were available on my shelves.
Yes.
Oh,
or you might be over.
They have these new like brownie cookies that are really good.
That sounds good.
Ah, I didn't see those. I love brownies.
But do you
Dang
want them as a cookie?
No, but they're a different texture. They're like, but they're really chocolatey.
Are
Are they like a brownie
cheesy?
bite?
No, they don't have the same texture as a brownie. They're more like a chewy cookie, but they have the chocolatey richness of a brownie.
See,
That
I'm
sounds
intrigued.
They're really
I
good.
love
I
the
make
shortbread
chocolate
ones. Those are
cake
classic.
cookies.
What?
I make chocolate cake cookies. That sounds sort of in
It
that
sounds like
vein.
that a little bit.
Yeah.
Maybe.
If you guys come to Tennessee, I'll make you some.
When Girl Scouts start
be
making
fun.
chips, I'll be in danger.
You have to let me know when it's better for tourists to go back to Nashville because I don't want to like overwhelm. But we wanted to go in 2020 and we couldn't because of
Angela, when I tell you that the tourists have never stopped coming here, you're fine. You come on back. We need the money. It's all good.
I want to
My property
tell my
taxes
partner,
are plummeting because of our tourist revenue. So
we
come
had
on
shoe
down.
shops we wanted to go to because there was a buy one get one free on boots. We had so many plans.
Girl, you let me know when you're here. Izzy's
Angela,
here
get
too now,
public-
so we can both take you out.
Wait, I don't think Publix is in Boston.
No, it's not. Publix is not a Boston
I
thing.
live next to a famous
Don't know
Publix.
what
It's on
Publix
TikTok
is.
because it's
Yeah.
where all the hot boys are.
Oh my
Is
god!
Publix a
So you can get a
grocery
pub sub, fried chicken, and look at some man meat.
Mm-hmm.
What is Publix?
It's
A
a
grocery
grocery,
grocery
store.
store.
It's more southern.
It's
in Florida,
southern,
I know that.
Midwestern southern.
It's not
Yeah.
Midwestern.
Now,
Great
sadly,
fried
it's owned
chicken.
by Trumpers.
Yeah.
Midwestern
But-
is Kroger's.
Great
Oh,
sub,
we like
fried
Yes,
chicken. and
Melissa, this is it. Adventurefuls brownie cookie with a salted cookie. That's the one.
Ooh.
Yes, they are delicious. They're
Okay.
really good.
There's so many boot stores in Nashville.
Thank you.
Yeah,
I'm
we
sorry.
do have a plethora of.
Leave me alone.
No, I
Man,
mean, it's just on our list.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You shop
see,
at
it's like I
Hot Boy
do
Publix.
almost all of my shopping at
Yeah,
Trader
Hot Boy.
Joe's because that is
Me too.
that
Trader
is-
Joe's.
I like
well,
Trader
it's funny
Joe's.
because where I live, it's the cheapest grocery store.
In the cities,
It's
Trader
still-
Joe's is the
it's-
cheapest by far.
It's definitely the cheapest, and they had by far the best pandemic protocols here in the South,
no.
aka like don't put a mask on my face Central. So
my
yeah,
God.
Trader Joe's is
Trader Joe's also
the
like
win.
I know it's a lie that it's a local neighborhood store, but it feels like
They
a
always
local
talk to
neighborhood
you.
I
store.
always talk to you.
they
and
know
smile.
me.
Like,
Yeah.
I got so confused because in the Midwest, people always talk to you when you check out or something. But in Boston, they don't. Except at Trader Joe's. They try to talk to me. And I'm like, but I've been conditioned to be a cold, heartless East Coaster. What are you
No,
doing?
they're trained to ask you about at least one item that you're buying.
You know what? They
Mhm.
don't do that in New York.
HEB.
They don't like it because everywhere else I've been, they do, but in New York City, they don't do that. Actually, it's interesting.
New York has conditioned them.
Yeah, right. All the way
Yeah.
around.
So good. All right.
I
Well,
love
thank
Trader
you
Joe's.
all for joining in this very.
I think we ended
can't
this
think of
by
a good word.
squeeing over grocery stores. So
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
That is appropriate.
That seems appropriate.
This
Yeah.
very enlivened. I don't know.
Lively.
I don't know. I don't think
Lively?
I've enjoyed the
Lively.
chat, but I don't think I've left knowing more.
No. I
No,
think
It's a
we-
mystery.
this was fun.
Oh, yeah.
we confirmed that they said a lot without saying much.
Anything.
So thank you to everyone for joining us, and thank you for watching the replay. Again, give this video a thumbs up. Thank you. all.
Yes, everyone hit the thumbs up before you leave for
Yes.
Jess.
Do it.
But good night, good day. I mean, it's technically good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you.
Yeah.